Good afternoon. Thanks to various people and a minor wardrobe malfunction, we are now ready to resume our Board of Commissioners meeting on Tuesday, November 10, Tuesday, December 10, 2019, at approximately 1:30 p.m. We are here to take up our climate action plan and possible climate action resolution. Then we're going to recess to the Board of Commissioners conference room, where I have personally done reconnaissance and know it's available after our meeting. Then we will be there for the remainder of the day. One question I had for you, Mr. Muckerheisky, was are we doing an executive session today?
Not today.
Okay, not today. Great. Okay, so Mr. Hurley's already in place, so at this time I will read the item and get going. 13A, discussion on the climate action plan and climate action resolution. With us to discuss this and introduce it for about 15 minutes is Dan Hurley, Director of Lane County Public Works. I'd like to thank Dan in particular for his leadership on this issue and welcome him to the table. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So at our last meeting on this topic of climate action, the board gave direction to move forward to create a climate action plan. I had recommended at that time to take a two-phased approach where we would move through the first phase, which would look internally to see what actions we can take for our internal operations and move quickly around those, and then to move into a second phase where we engage with the community and develop a broader community-wide plan. So we've started moving forward with that. The purpose of the update today is to talk to you about where we're at on these issues and also about a climate resolution. The board had given direction to come back with a resolution. So on the climate action plan, the first thing was to create a climate action team. So we formed a team of 7 people. They're listed in your packet there. I have some behind me in case you have specific questions related to fleet or procurement or something like that. But we have 7 people internal to the county. A lot of them have expertise in this, former employment working on climate issues. So great that we have some expertise at the table to move forward with this within the county. So 7 people representing a cross-section of the county in different departments. And we're meeting every 2 weeks to move the project along. The first task was to get an RFP out to hire a consulting firm to bring on board. We did that. We received 3 proposals and selected good company to do that work. Their proposal is in your packet. I have great confidence in them. They have done this type of work across the state. They've done this work for the city of Eugene, have a great reputation in climate work. So we've had a kickoff meeting with them to start the greenhouse gas inventory and figure out what data we needed to collect on that. Angie Marzano at the Waste Management Division is taking the lead on that to start gathering that information. That will tell us what we need to do to where are our highest sources of emissions. They will then develop some recommendations to prioritize those and formulate that into the phase 1 plan. Excuse me. So that's moving forward. We're planning to do that inventory work over the next few months. We'll bring you an update on that. And then to keep working on that phase 1 plan. Ultimately, at the end of the summer, timing-wise, we're looking at bringing that plan to you for your consideration of what you would like to see in that. We'll probably bring updates along the way, but hopefully adopting towards the end of the summer for the Climate Action Plan, phase 1. So let's see. I think that the other major piece is we are creating a position in the Waste Management Division. We've taken a vacant position and reclassified that to have a project lead for this. I'm pulled in a lot of different directions as a Public Works Director, and we need to have somebody that's primarily focused on this climate work. So that position will post on Friday. For folks in the audience that know people that could do this work, we'd love to see applications. You can go to Lane County Jobs, search that, and it will be it's called a Senior Engineer Associate position in the Waste Management Division. But the primary task of that position would be to lead this climate work. So looking forward to getting that on board to help us move through. moving on to the resolution, when we received that direction at our last meeting on this topic, we didn't get a whole lot of clarity of what you would like to have in a resolution. So as we got into this, we had a lot of questions. With the climate action team, we scoured and tried to find examples of a resolution and came up with several of them. We have some examples in your packet. The one that we liked the most was an example from Alameda County, and we drafted a resolution based on that one, but it grew quite large and very specific to 20 commitments that we would move forward with. But we shared that with, we started through the public engagement. We met with a representative from the local chapter of the NAACP, wanting to make sure that we keep equity at the focus of this at the beginning and then through the process, and also with Beyond Toxics. They had some great feedback on that draft and would like to see things added to it. In particular, things such as committing to a third phase of the plan where we would focus on resiliency. Also formulating an environmental justice lens. And then there were other specific requests that we look at, looking at our land use policies, having sort of a prohibition on legislation that we would endorse that would have negative climate impacts. So there were a lot of issues that we need to consider on that. And we were concerned about getting too far ahead with having a draft that hasn't received public input. And you heard from the public comment this morning that people are concerned that we have a robust process of having public input. So I thought we, instead of presenting a draft for you to consider that we've formulated, wanted to give these other examples of drafts that we would, and get your feedback on what you would want to have in it. So in your packet there, we have the one from Alameda County. There's also an example that I think some of the board members have received from Beyond Toxics, from the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights. It's called the Declaration on Human Rights and Climate Change. So this is an example of a broader resolution that the board could kind of sign on to rather than creating our own resolution. Another example in there is the U.S. Cool Counties Climate Stabilization Declaration. This was an effort about 10 years ago when counties were starting to take on this work that many counties signed on to this declaration. At this point, that declaration is getting a little dated. It commits to goals that, pieces of legislation that are no longer in play. So we would probably want to have some caveats on that one if we signed up for that one in particular. So I would recommend that we have some more conversation and some public input before we develop that resolution. As part of the phase 1 project, we will have Good Company solicit sort of a request for interest for groups that want to be a part of this, and we'll start gathering that. We will also have a minimum of 3 listening sessions around the county to get input from the community before we start into that phase 2 work. So things that we're going to need to consider are the targets. What are our greenhouse gas reduction targets going to be? That's an important decision, and I think we need to have some conversation around that. It gets pretty complicated based on the parts per million in the atmosphere, what degree of warming you're considering. So I think it's something that we don't want to just kind of pull quickly and set on one of those. There are 3 options here that we listed as potential. There's to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. That's sort of an older goal that is similar to what the state has currently and what was in the original Paris Accord, to try to limit warming to 2 degrees. Most scientists now are saying that that is not protective enough, that we would need to move more quickly. Another possibility would be to try to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. With that, or a sooner timeline, 2040. With any of these, we need to consider what that means. Are we talking about carbon neutrality for county operations? Are we talking about county-wide for all the residents in total? Are we talking about, are we including consumption? So if someone purchases something that's in China, it's produced there, there's the transportation to get it here? Are we just counting the transportation piece? There's the end-of-life disposal. So there's a lot of things to consider as we develop this. And I think there needs to be a conversation with the community so that we have broad community support on what those targets are going to be. I also want to make sure that we have clarity as we engage with the public and have a resolution about what we can do and what we can't do as the county. So as you're aware, for most things, what the cities do is under the jurisdiction of the cities, and we don't have a lot of control over the actions of the cities. So if we're developing a countywide plan, are we clear that we may not have control of what the cities do that relates to climate and emissions? So obviously, we're going to want to try to work with the cities to develop a plan that is unified, but just something that we need to have clarity for as we move forward with this. I just want to make sure that we're not setting up unrealistic expectations with the public as we commit to our climate goals. So one idea would be to wait until we're further along in the process. Another would be to try to act on something now on one of these drafts that we have in front of you. And then a third one would be, we did find another resolution called a climate leadership resolution. This was done in 2006 by Alameda County, which was a very limited resolution committing to the things that basically you have given direction on already, to conduct a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, to establish greenhouse gas reduction targets. We haven't done that, but this was just to commit to establishing them. It wasn't saying what the targets would be. To develop an implementation plan to meet targets, to implement the plan, and to monitor and review progress. So it could be something simple like that. So the City of Eugene has their climate ordinance. With that, there were community goals and city goals. And then you've heard from other community groups about what they would like to see. So I guess I'll stop there and just lay that out as those are the considerations. We could go in different directions here, but wanting to receive some feedback from you before we keep moving to draft a resolution.
Just a brief correction. As a Board of Health, we can do border to border, including inside the cities.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for introducing this. Mr. Hurley, what do you think of dividing up our conversation, that is the further discussion on the climate action plan versus the resolution, and kind of focus on the climate action plan, and then if we have time, give some feedback on the climate action resolution? I think you wanted us to think about that anyway, and I just wanted to get your opinion on
That's
focusing in on the plan and how we're going to do the plan.
I think that's fine, Chair. I think for the plan, there's probably not as much to talk about. We've already moved forward with how we're going to work through the phase 1 plan, and we'll update you along the way on that.
So you got the consultant lined up, good company. You've got them onto a plan of public engagement, and what else are they going to be doing?
They're going to help us with our inventory for our county operations, and then developing prioritized lists of actions that they would recommend that we take.
All right. And then with regard to the resolution, you've got various resolutions from other counties. You've kind of focused on the Alameda County one, but it's somewhat dated in terms of time.
I would say it's somewhat dated. I think we could do a refresh on that. The dated piece was more on that U.S. Cool Counties declaration.
You know, I heard the UN Secretary General talk about this the other day and on TV, and he was saying that he's concerned actually more about his grandchildren than anyone else. And that put it into perspective for me that we've got, you know, little people in our lives who are going to be affected by what we do now. So I feel some urgency here that we need to make up for the fact that we weren't doing anything 10 years ago when the Cool Counties consortium got together. And I feel like we need to advance our work on this a lot and a lot faster. I really appreciate what you are trying to do here, and I know the commissioners will have plenty to talk about. So who wants to go first? You, Commissioner Burney, or you? Commissioner Bozevich will go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was unfortunately in Germany when we first discussed this, and I want to take a few minutes, and then I'll probably be quiet most of the rest of the meeting, because I didn't get a chance to talk about climate action planning and climate in general. And I want to first clarify some of what's been reported in public about what my position is, which I always love when people tell me what my position is. Yes, I believe the climate is changing. Yes, I believe it's trending warmer, short-term since the 70s, long-term since the Little Ice Age. Yes, I believe there's a human portion, a human-caused portion of that warming. So let's get that out of the way. What I question is causes and magnitude. And it's my science background that causes me to question a lot of that. We're overemphasizing the role of CO2 quite often, and we're not talking about population growth, land use changes, irrigated agriculture growth, and the decrease in particulate pollution that's happened since the 70s, which was a negative feedback loop to warming. You know, there's so much that we just haven't quite understood. None of our current models can go back before the 30s and end up with today's climate. None of them can successfully do it. They can start in the 70s and do it, but they can't start back in the 30s. So my concern has always been the overemphasis of the role of CO2 and the focus on CO2 goals. But I understand I'm the only person on this board that has that skepticism and has gone through the science. I'm also the only person on this board that has a degree in science. I'm the only person on this board that spent my entire career protecting the environment as an engineer. I'm also the only person on this board that was so concerned about population growth that my wife and I chose back in the 80s not to have children. So I am an environmentalist, but I'm also have a science background. I have two brothers that work as subcontractors for NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in their satellite programs that share my beliefs. So my only thing about this whole effort, and I'm going to be quiet after this because I understand I am in the extreme minority, is listen to what the environmentalists often say about the precautionary principle. First, do no harm. We only have real control over about 100,000 population in a state that has one of the lowest carbon footprints in the country because of our high dependence on hydroelectric electricity. We can't move the needle very far with a climate action plan worldwide, even if you believe in everything everyone says about CO2. So please, as you develop a plan, think about what will do harm to Lane County economically, to our housing crisis and cost of housing, to the cost of basic services and food for our poorest people. So please just keep that in mind. And after this, I'm going to be very quiet probably because I know I'm going to be the one no vote on almost all of this. But I've stated my position. I just hope that we can look at that. I fully support efforts for us to try and be as conservative in our use of resources internally and to promote through education the external use of that. Just as I chose not to have children, I would never support a law or passing a law to force other people to limit the amount of children they have. Thank you.
Okay, other comments, questions? Go ahead.
I'd like to start my discussion by publicly stating that I have absolute no question about my fellow commissioners' integrity. We may have different views, but on some subjects, we have similar views on others. But I just want you to know, and I'll go on record as saying that that I absolutely respect Commissioner Bozovich's feelings and understandings and analysis, and I think it will temper us as we move forward. Having said that, in the past, first of all, I believe that any climate ordinance developed 13 years ago is so freaking out of date, it's not even funny. We have moved so far beyond that in an exponential period of time. My past business, by the way, I'm just going to say that I started my career in education in 1974, developing an alternative school, and it was an environmental studies alternative school. And many of the subjects that we're talking about now were talked about then, except now we're experiencing many of them. So my last work engagement was owning a business that, among other things, and this is actually going to come to point here, among other things, developed what is still today's, which is really sad, largest net zero plus facility in the United States. It produces more clean energy than it consumes. It stores the difference in batteries, and it has over 160 days worth of emergency energy that is powering freezers and pumps and lights, so that has become one of the primary evacuation facilities for the County of Los Angeles. So as we look at a county plan, one, I'm very disappointed that Mr. Proudfoot is not here, because I did read the proposal that you have in our packet, and I had several questions for him. As background, full transparency, when I decided to run, I asked Joshua if he'd write my platform as it related to the environment. He said yes, but he didn't. But it looks like he has now. He's developed this proposal for the county. One, I would like to see the following in whatever is developed. I'd like an update to this board in March, and if we don't choose to move on a resolution at this point, I would like to see a draft resolution for us to vote on by then, personally. Second, I would like to see this be a climate action planning / climate action initiative. As I read through the proposal, I saw layers and layers of planning, but I didn't see an urgency to action, and maybe that's on me. I'm going to suggest that by March we start looking at and forming a community, not just an internal advisory group, but a community advisory group. And I commend you, Dan, for already meeting with several groups. I think you mentioned Beyond Toxics and some.
And then AACP, and then we're meeting with 350 Eugene today.
So I would like, thank you, sir. I would like to state that Dan has been very willing to do that in methodically trying to make this community-based. And these are groups that historically have not been at the table from the beginning as the county is looking at an initiative such as this, so I commend you for that. I would suggest that a dashboard be developed to demonstrate to the public how we intend to communicate the measurements and the progress as we're moving forward. And I would like in the public, this is why you can see, I wish Josh was here. I could get the back and forth with him.
He regrets that he couldn't be here. He had a conflict, but this wasn't in the scope of his work.
I'm not being critical. I just wish he was here.
He will be here for future updates.
Okay, but he'll hear this. So, and I'm curious, and I'm just going to put the question out there. Why is he hiring out for public engagement? What specifically will that look like? I'm really curious about that, because I think that's going to create the basis from which we move forward. I would like in his scope of work, as he's doing this, to identify the business opportunities that a real county commitment to climate action might create. I don't know how specific he can get, but I'm hoping we get some insights there. Opportunities to attract capital for these activities. I will be interested out of this report to see if there are proposals for how the county can provide incentives for people and institutions to retrofit with solar and batteries some existing facilities. I'll be interested to see if the county might take another look at residential property assessed clean energy financing, which allows residential customers to create special districts of their homes so that the debt attached to energy efficiency retrofitting or solar of their homes does not increase the debt on their houses, but becomes part of a special district, which facilitates that in California. I will be interested to see whether or not there can be a dovetailing of opportunity zones with creating a fund for some of these kinds of activities, which we're looking at in Springfield right now. I'm going to suggest that when we do look at an ordinance or something, that we establish very aggressive goals, not that we will meet them, but that we need to establish them. And I am one that's going to rely less on a year or two or three coordinating with cities to make sure something is reasonable than a bias towards action, knowing we won't achieve it, but pointing true north. And then finally, here's why I think that this will be smart for the county pragmatically also. I believe at some point the pendulum is going to swing in federal and state government with resources for these kind of activities. And I think that the sooner that Lane County is positioned to have shovel-ready projects, the more likely we are going to be to attract dollars. And I'm going to end in terms of input on this, because I did read the proposal from Good Company. And I have total faith in them, by the way. I mean, excellent selection. But today's paper, here's the whole thing. It won't take long. When money is behind something, you know that there's a market there to assist us. Madrid, investors call for climate action to be taken. More than 600 institutional investors managing a whopping $37 trillion in client assets called Monday for governments to step up their efforts against climate change. The investors, including banks, pension funds, insurance companies, directed their message to countries participating in a 2-week UN climate conference in Madrid. Firms such as Britain's Aviva, the California PERS system, and Zurich Insurance Group demanded an end to the thermal coal power plants worldwide, the introduction of a meaningful price on carbon, an end to fossil fuel subsidies, and for governments to increase planned emission cuts beyond what has already been pledged, which are not happening, by the way, on target at this point in time. So, in closing, I absolutely agree. We are a small county in a small state, in a country, in a world. But I believe we have to think globally, act locally, demonstrate to others what is possible, and hopefully incite further action. And I understand there are variables outside of our control. So I appreciate your approach in terms of what's in our control, what's outside of our control, and how can we influence that. And that's a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners want to make remarks? Go ahead.
Well, I can only wish to be as thorough and as knowledgeable in this as Commissioner Berney, and so I can only extend my wholehearted support of everything that he's mentioned. I'm disappointed we don't have a resolution today to talk about. I feel the pressure of not getting anything done on the ground when we know that time is not on our side. On this anniversary of human rights, it would have been nice to at least have a resolution that supports the Declaration of Human Rights and climate change. That would have been apropos for something today. I also know that we want it to be right for Lane County, and I acknowledge that. But I think waiting until the end of summer next year doesn't make a lot of sense. we don't really have that much leeway on this particular subject. I feel we need to be more urgent about it. And of course, I do want public input and support getting as much out there to the public and getting that feedback. I think we have to do that throughout the process as we go along regardless, because this is an ever-changing issue and more knowledge comes out every day about this particular subject that we all have to think about and incorporate into our daily lives. If we have to wait till March, I think that's what you mentioned, then fine. But it would make sense that we at least have a resolution that shows we absolutely feel like we need to take action on this, and acknowledge the Declaration of Human Rights and climate change, and acknowledge some of these other world associations that have done all this homework before, at the very least. And if we want to get into additional resolutions about specific details, we can do that as our work unfolds. But at the very least, it makes sense that we, as a body of the Lane County government body, acknowledge this issue and set and just lay out how we're going to go about it, and then update it as we go with specific guidelines we know we want to be achieving. The public is urging us, they've been urging us all year, and they're right. We need to act faster. So I don't know how to push this along. I mean, that's really why I think we've handed to you to take the reins. But I have real concerns about waiting too long or not getting, actionable items out the door.
Mr. Chair. I just, on that point, for Commissioner Buck, I think that we certainly could bring forward a resolution. We could have brought forward a resolution today, but in the board's direction, there wasn't specificity about what type of resolution you wanted to see. And when the group of staff that was working on developing it started looking at other agencies, we identified the other agencies that have adopted resolutions have these really specific goals and requirements. And it just sort of was one of these slippery slopes. We sort of felt like it's all or nothing, and we didn't have any public feedback in the process. So if the board desires a resolution that simply acknowledges the issue and acknowledges the need to take action, but isn't specific about any, I mean, you've done that in some other cases, the homeless declaration of a homeless crisis. If it's more in the way of sort of acknowledging the problem but not committing to specific actions, and you're okay not having a significant amount of public feedback on that, we can do that. We can bring that forward to you probably in advance of March. If you want significant public feedback and you want it to be a resolution that has requirements and teeth and action to it, that's what we're suggesting. If you want something in that realm, we think it would be wise to pursue public feedback and to really take the time to look at those. So we can do either one or both, but we really need the board to tell us what your desire would be, and then we'll follow that.
Mine, I think, was a little bit of a blend. Like, we should acknowledge this as soon as possible, but also in the resolution to lay out what we're going to be doing in the coming year to act on it. And then maybe at the end of September, when we have gone through our whole full first step of this and have laid out a lot of public input during that time, we can come back with more actionable items on a second resolution. That would make me feel like we're progressing somewhere. And the first resolution would be, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z in 2020 to make change here.
Hey, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Buck, and for the request that you just made. I'd like to follow that up a little bit, but I have a little bit of direction that I'd like to ask for first. Commissioner Burney, I've been working with good companies since I was the director of food for Lane County. They help with the food insecurity issues, and I actually helped them make a proposal at one point. They are very good at their work, very efficient, and I believe that Josh could probably ask you for help with his climate action platform, based upon the recital that you just delivered here in front of the Board of Commissioners. I spent last Friday morning with Chelsea Clinton, who is the sustainability manager for the city of Eugene, and with Mark Nystrom, who is a climate recovery ordinance analyst for the city of Eugene. And they made a presentation in front of a group of business people, predominantly. It was the Chamber of Commerce Local Government Affairs Committee. And I sat as a fly on the wall. I'm not on that committee. But I listened to their presentation, and I was pretty impressed with their grasp of where they are. And I was also impressed with the fact that they believe they're not as far ahead as they thought they might be at this point in time, and that they are looking at ways to catch up, so to speak. Now, they made this presentation in front of a group of predominantly business owners, but not exclusively business owners. There were some realtors, for instance, and some other people involved who had some fairly pointed questions for them, which I'll ask in a little bit. But my point regarding the group that was in the room is that it was the public, and they do have thoughts on this, and it was none of the people that have already testified to the Board of Commissioners, which tells me there are a lot of people out there that are beyond the group of people who have been regular testimony providers here that will have an opinion, whichever direction we go. So while it's clear that we are moving toward resolution or resolutions, and it is clear that we are moving toward a climate action plan, I think moving forward, not more slowly, continue to be aggressive, but in a way that really involves the public. You do describe listening sessions, for instance, and having a chance to really engage with people who aren't the people who find who are able to get in here, or who take the time to get in here and make presentations to us or public testimony to us, but other people beyond that. And once again, there was nobody in the room of about, I don't know, 35 people perhaps, who'd ever made testimony regarding climate change here, but they did have opinions on it. So that gives me the belief that there are people out there who would like to weigh in on this that haven't already weighed in here in Harris Hall. So I'm looking forward to that. The second thing I'd like to do is, as we move forward, and clearly we are moving forward, I want to know who we have working on it internally. Who's our staff working on this? And I've got a question for you first. Dan, what is your background on environmental issues? And I mean, you're brand new at this, right?
My
No.
background, excuse me, I have an environmental engineering degree from West Point. I have an environmental studies master's degree from the University of Oregon, and I've been working in the waste management division, 13 years before I became the director.
See, I knew all of that, but I wanted to illustrate, you're not brand new at this. This is something you've actually kind of spent your life on. And Mr. Johns, can you describe, are you brand new at this, or do you have a bit of a background in
Would you come up to the table
issues?
to give us the brief version to the answer to that question?
Mr. Chair, I want to give people confidence that we actually have people working for Lane County who have been doing this and who are.
Yeah, I've been working on these issues probably since as a transportation officer in the Army, and then as a logistics chief in the United Nations in peacekeeping. And since I've been here for 10 years, and I also have a master's degree in environmental policy and sustainability with our concentration in energy and sustainability.
So once again, this is something you've devoted your life to a certain extent. Not to a certain extent, but almost exclusively. And I want people to be reassured that the people that we have working at Lane County who are paying attention to this, seemingly at the bidding of a new Board of County Commissioners, aren't doing it for the first time. This is something you've been doing, and I'd like to point out that it's long been consistent with board goals that the organization operate in accordance with environmental best management practices. You're going to describe what that means, and so one thing that I would like to ask for before we actually look at a resolution, or before we look at finalizing a resolution, is what have we done? You know, I'm not the first person to ask for this, but where are we in the continuum or in the timeline of Lane County's climate action plan? This isn't day one. It's not even it's not even year 6, which is how long I've been here. So, you know, where are we? What have we done? And what have we done that has been effective? And have we learned? Also, I'm really extremely interested, and my interest is highly piqued on what is happening with the city of Eugene, because I've been taking a close look at their ordinance, and it's aggressive. It seems aggressive, but they feel that they're not getting there soon enough. So I'd like to have all of that information before we start to make decisions as to what we can do, because, as I said before, we don't have to be the Board of County Commissioners. We can be the Board of Health. And as the Board of Health, we can tell every jurisdiction inside of the county what to do, as long as it is a health-related issue. And then we can demonstrate that it is a health-related issue. So what we do isn't necessarily just for rural Lane County. What we do can be more broadcast. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is something that you touched on a little bit, Dan, and that is how far do we want to go in terms of where our ordinance or our resolution leads us. Do we want to go as far as, for instance, nobody in Lane County can even wear a shoelace that was produced in a factory that doesn't comply closely with the rules that we establish here? Now, that's ridiculous, isn't it? So, but seriously, at what point do we want to jump in and say, this is where we draw the line? You know, we're looking at styrofoam right now. You know, we're looking at other issues. Where do we draw the line as far as what you cannot engage in Lane County without running afoul of the ordinances or the county's resolution? And really, you know, it's not a line in the sand, because it really is a really broad, it's not even a blurry line, it's a landscape that you look at as far as where people are addressing climate issues. And really, we look at what happens in China, where there's nobody, I'd be surprised if there's anybody in this room that doesn't have a piece of clothing that wasn't made in China, or a pin on their jacket that wasn't made in China, or a shoelace that wasn't made in China. You know, what can we do to affect the real heavy pollutants of the world? Is our small efforts here moving the needle, however slightly it might be? Is it going to parlay into a greater effort that really does have makes an impact on a broader scale than just Lane County, just Oregon, just the United States, just North America, the entire world? You know, I'd like to put all of that in perspective. We are moving forward with this. I believe we've been moving forward for a lot of years, and I believe that we are accelerating, and we're moving toward what is going to feel a little bit more tangible in terms of the direction from this Board of County Commissioners. And it's going to give you more information as to what it is that we'd like to see back as far as a resolution and ultimately as far as ordinances are concerned. So I've ran on a little bit, but that's basically, you know, just to kind of put this in perspective of where we have been, where we are, where we want to be, and who is it that we have leading the effort. So anything you want to say about that?
There's a lot to cover there.
Well, yeah.
As far as what we have been doing, yes, this isn't new doing environmental work here. We did do a presentation to the board several months ago to talk about the best management practices that we have been implementing. You know, some big ones are in fleet and the use of renewable diesel and other electric vehicles and that sort of thing. Another area is in waste management, where we have the highest recovery rate in the state for recycling. So those sorts of things. But as far as where we are in the process, I would say we're well behind. I mean, when this U.S. Cools Counties initiative, 10 years ago, when counties were signing on to develop climate action plans, we have never done an inventory. This is our first inventory. So in that period of time, people were setting goals to get to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. So those were some of those earlier goals. We don't know what our levels were in 1990, and we would have to try to estimate based on our current levels. But we are behind in doing this work, I would say.
That's a wonderful response, and I'd just like to add one last element to that, and we're moving forward with that. We've stepped up the effort. We're putting more energy into it. We have more people working on it internally, and we have stepped outside to good company to have them help us with what we're moving forward on. The other thing that I heard and I'll repeat this, is that if we're not moving the needle very far, yet we are in many ways, according to what I've heard, making it more expensive to live here, while other people don't do anything. For instance, maybe China, I don't know, maybe China. And they laugh at us for our efforts while we have negative living effects on the small number of people in Lane County, while moving the needle very little. People who could move the needle a great deal are just really kind of laughing at us, saying, you guys keep doing that. Now, one thing that, an illustration of that is one of the things that they're talking about with the city of Eugene is having an assessment on houses before they sell, or on an ongoing basis, to give them a score, maybe 1 to 10, as to where they are as far as their footprint. And the higher the score in this proposal, the better, the more climate change-friendly your home is. But what does that do to the price of a house? Because that would involve a periodic inspection of the house, which costs the owner of the house money. And they said, well, you could defer it to the time when the house sells. Well, when the house sells, then the house sells for a higher price. Incremental, maybe. Exponential, maybe. I don't know. So, you know, how do we justify to the people living here that we are, in truth, costing them more dollars to live in a residence, while certainly making the earth a better place to live? You know, are they getting the right balance while they look across the Pacific Ocean and say, well, really, it's all happening right there? So.
I think those are important concerns, and that's something we've wanted to make sure that we're looking at early in the process, that we're talking about equity and bringing that into the conversation. So I would recommend, I like the idea of having an advisory committee. I think there also needs to be an advisory committee around the equity issue, because the people that are going to be affected by this issue, one way or another, are going to be the people that are most marginalized. I think we always need to keep in consideration the costs of not acting. So the cost to our economy as the environment changes could be drastic. And so I've seen a presentation from Good Company. I would like to bring that to you at some point to talk about the economic effects of climate change that we're expecting to see, given the current trend. So I think that's important to look at.
That's not the report that's contained in our packet today.
It's not.
No, it's beyond that. Well, great. And I've not answered any questions, nor have you. I've kind of raised them. And as far as moving forward with the resolution, I'm fine waiting until March or May or whenever it may be, in order to make certain that the people who would weigh in negatively after it happened have a chance to weigh in before it happens. So, thank you.
Thank you. Couple of things I'll make a few remarks on, and then we can go around for another round if we want. The first is, I pointed this out a month or so ago, the Federal Reserve Bank Board met in San Francisco, and for the first time in November of 2019, held a forum on how climate change will affect the U.S. and world economy. And it's the first time they've really jumped into the climate change thing. And I think it underscores what Commissioner Burney was saying about how money is beginning to, big money, national governments, corporations, pension funds are really starting to look at climate change in terms of its reality, that it's coming, the impact it's having on not only society, but on financial markets and the economy of the world. So I think it's really ramping up faster and faster and faster in terms of the awareness in all sectors of society. The second thing I'll mention is that this climate plan we're going to be working on, I think at least has to have at least 3 components. An internal component to the county government. I know that's what you guys have been mainly working on. An external component in terms of its effect on the people of Lane County and all the other businesses and governments and nonprofits and all the professions and really everything in Lane County. And that's what Commissioner Farr was getting, I think, in terms of the reach of the government's, Lane County government's and Board of Health's regulatory authority, getting beyond just the government, the Lane County government, and getting into a broader thing. And then last but not least, I think there's policy initiatives going on at the United Nations, at the federal government, Congress and administration, and of course in our own legislature, where we need to get policy changes done in order to do things we'd like to do. So there's really, to my mind, at least 3 of these components, and they all involve public involvement. They all involve expertise. I was trying to think, what was my first involvement in this issue? I went back 1973. I was taking a graduate seminar in climatology at the U of O. I mean, for me, this has been a long time involvement, and I think that for all of us up here, it's something that is a huge thing in our lives. People are asking us about it. There's lots in the news media about it. In terms of being more specific with things that we could be doing, Yale University has a climate, it's called Yale Climate Connections, and they did a 2-part series on what governments can do. And they started out by saying that governments can use the best green technologies and practices both for their procurement of the things they buy as well as infrastructure upgrades. That's a huge thing that governments can do, all governments. It was pointed out that the federal government has 360,000 buildings, 650,000 vehicles, $445 billion spent on goods and services. And that, of course, is the big picture federal government. But local governments are also big consumers of things and will help drive markets. And the example was the article by Christian Parenti, who's an investigative journalist for The Nation magazine, wrote that a single action, i.e. replacing the Postal Service gas-powered delivery trucks with all-electric trucks, would bring down the price of sustainable transportation in the United States. Well, we don't have vehicles that go 20 miles each day, as the average postal vehicle does. But I'm sure Mr. Johns knows we have a lot of vehicles that go out to inspect restaurants and other things where our purchasing power will affect the overall economics of these kinds of vehicles. So another one is when county employees enter job orientation, what is the level of information they're given about their role as a new fee collector at the solid waste, or as a restaurant inspector, or whatever they do at the county? What's their role in climate change? Do they get any orientation at all on the topic? Now, that may seem odd to some people, but we also didn't used to give people orientation about their role in making the workplace welcoming and minimizing our liabilities associated with nasty things that some people sometimes do in the workplace. But now we realize that's a best practice to start that out early. What about funding for land or conservation easements? Another role of local governments or state governments. Another one would be the funding of enforcement of speed limits. How many people here are old enough to remember when President Nixon lowered the speeds? I see a few people whose hair color resembles mine. What does that got to do with the environment? Well, it has everything to do with it, because the cars that are going on the freeways at 75 miles an hour are using a lot more energy than cars that are going 55 miles an hour. When we had lines of people waiting in gas lines, that was a mechanism to conserve energy. And how many times are you going to hear me up here complimenting the Nixon administration on an executive order? I think we've just achieved it one time. But the point is, we should be doing things like that. And we have a role as a government in setting speed limits. Another one is drop unreasonable barriers to solar power development. Okay? Another one is boost support for agricultural experimentation research. It's a bit, I think it's a bit fuzzy because at the end of the article, you realize the guy that wrote the article was a agricultural experiment station. But he takes the view that we need to be doing more research. And again, is that beyond the county scope? Probably is. We don't fund a lot of agricultural research. Use rebates to support energy efficiency and conservation and the use of renewable resources. Construct more bikeways, bike lanes, bike parking spaces. Require composting by large fuel waste generators. I know Mr. Hurley, former division manager in the Waste Management Division. I know you in your former job and now in your present job, but require composting by large food waste generators, i.e. arenas. I'll fill in names like Autzen Stadium, Lane County Fairgrounds, restaurants, schools, food manufacturers, retailers, wholesales, all involved. Provide incentives. This is relevant to our land management division. Provide incentives to help counter urban sprawl. Strengthening urban forests. We know that trees provide shade and they provide cooling. Reduce energy use and light pollution without compromising public safety. Charge property owners appropriately for leaf and brush pickup. Restrict the use of leaf blowers, gas-powered leaf blowers. I see the city of Portland is doing that on their parks department. It's not regulatory. They're not restricting it yet, but they're trying to see the environmental impact of gas-powered leaf blowers. So there's an internal component to this of what Lane County government can be doing that applies not just to the Public Works Department, but to the whole county. Secondly, there's an external role of the county government in its role as a health agency and responsible for health and having a broader, and Commissioner Berney hit on something, and that is we are trying to lead this effort, okay? I'll just speak for myself. We should be leading this effort among local governments. We should not be waiting around for this effort to be diluted by an average, or worse yet, the lowest common denominator of 11, 12, 30, 50 governments. No, we should be leading this using the authority that the legislature has given us. So I really want to emphasize that. And then I think this final component of internal, external, but within the county, is then the policy issues. We've got things at the legislature or in Congress. I see our friends that are advocating the national carbon tax are here. We can do things in our role as an entity that provides information to our congressional delegation, to our legislative delegation, and when issues come, when we can't do something that we think is in the public interest and we come up against these policies, we ought to be making, instead of saying, oh, we can't do that. Well, we can't do that is one answer, and we can't do that precisely. We can do something else almost as good or maybe better, but it would be nice if we got rid of this restriction or this policy at the federal level. So I just think that it's got to be all of these things. And last but not least, on the topic of the resolution, I think, you know, it's sort of a which is going to come first here. You guys have made some research, good research on what resolutions are out there. They may be dated. We've heard some perspective here that we'd like to get a resolution. I would like to get a resolution. I'm hearing 3 commissioners that would like a resolution. So maybe the thing to do is to have you, Mr. Hurley, or the person you're designating, write up a resolution that you think encompasses 80 to 100% of what you've heard here, so that you can make a proposal, and then the commissioners, myself included, who may have problems with a word here or there, or even the whole idea, they can voice that at the next time we get together. And is it possible we could put those 2 things together with Mr. Proudfoot coming in? Because you did hear it would be nice if we could have him come in as well And what would a timeline for that be? Both what I would call the new and improved resolution, I'll even call it the best effort that a West Point graduate could give us in a resolution, and Mr. Proudfoot, come back here, what would be a timeline to do both those things, approximately?
Chair, we could do that very soon. We've already drafted an example based on Alameda County, but I guess what I would like to hear from you, if I could get a little more specificity on what you'd want in the resolution. So if you go to your packet and look at the Alameda example, for example, there are more than a page of whereases that lay the stage for it, and then get into a series of probably a dozen resolutions, and then there's an attachment of 16 commitments that get very specific. We've crafted something like this.
I'll just
but-
speak for myself. I'd like to see something say, this is what we've been doing, the things Lane County government has been doing over the past few years. I know Mr. Johns has done a lot of work at the fleet. I know that there's been a lot of work done at the landfill and waste management division in general. We've done a lot of things, and here's what we're committing to. We've already put Good Company on contract. We're committing to public engagement on the issue of a climate action plan. We're committing to produce that plan. We're committed to engaging the public. So let's just, because that's just the first resolution. We're going to have other resolutions. So let's just agree on what we can agree on now.
And that's more like that second Alameda County example, which is that leadership commitment. And I think we could put something that's more streamlined together like that in a short period of time. I think we could do that soon after the first of the year and bring.
Yeah.
It is more like the second one, yes.
Mr. Chair, I just, what I heard Commissioner Buck articulate was sort of a phased approach that earlier part of next year, we bring forward this sort of higher level resolution that talks about what we have done, what we're committing to do, process that's in place, acknowledgement of the issue. And then as we go forward and we seek additional public feedback and we get more with our work with the Good Company, we get more specific on requirements and goals and action items that we can amend that resolution. Maybe it's the same one, or maybe we come up with a second one. But I heard sort of either a first and second resolution or a first resolution that sort of gets amended as we get more specific into the plan.
Yeah. For myself, I would just say, I'm for doing a resolution on whatever a majority of this board wants to commit to, because I'm for moving faster. So I have no problem having a first resolution, a second resolution, and just to continue to tell the public that we are working on this. And I know Commissioner Burney wants to make some remarks.
I think you heard me suggest that, and you heard Commissioner Buck agree with that, and I think Commissioner Farr also said that medium path made sense. Here we have a commissioner who's been a commissioner for 22 years who wants to move faster. Well, now I would like to put this in a perspective, if I may, because we really need to read all the material here, and it's really substantive and qualitative. One, I want to acknowledge what two commissioners have stated. Here's two illustrations of how big the problem is. Bitcoin, something relatively new on the scene. According to the Bitcoin Energy Consumption Tracker, Bitcoin consumes 68 terawatt hours per year. Bitcoin consumes the total energy consumption of the Czech Republic, a country of 10.6 million people. That's Bitcoin. Now, in terms of how big this issue is, I'd also like to share one other thing. In addition to roughly 1,000 gigawatts of existing coal capacity, China has 121 gigawatts of coal plants under construction as we speak. This problem is huge. We are not going to solve it in Lane County. However, I would also like to suggest just a word of hope. Margaret Mead, whom I had the honor of traveling with on the island of Bali in 1976, and that's a whole other story. Margaret Mead stated, as we all know, one of her famous quotes, "Do not doubt that a few people can change the world. Indeed, that's the only way the world has changed." I believe we have the potential here in Lane County with the University of Oregon, with good company, with a tremendous amount of talent, with two individuals who are charged with leading this effort operationally for the county, whose life passion has been this subject. I think there is a serendipity at play, and I would like to suggest that we have the brain power, we have the capacity, and now I think we're going to start seeing the political will to truly, initially conceptually and inclusively, and as Mr. Hurley has mentioned, following the 8 United Nations climate policy guidelines, which include inclusivity and items that are actually enforceable and doable, et cetera. We have the opportunity to actually methodically, properly structure this. So I myself am exceedingly hopeful. And I agree also with Commissioner Farr. I mean, I'm going to be speaking to the Eugene Chamber Government Affairs Committee about this subject. So you can also use us to convene groups and get feedback for the county in a cohesive way. I myself am delighted and honored to be one of those that is giving you the ability to follow your passions. And I thank you both so much.
Okay.
I think we have enough input. I appreciate your sense of urgency around that, and we will work to meet that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Chair.
Yeah, Jay needs to, Commissioner Bozovich.
Just a couple things. One, I hope that you understand beyond toxics, the NAACP and 350 Eugene are not representative of the entire community. We would be slayed if we were doing something on land development rules or something, and the only people we talk to is the home builders. So I hope that we're going to diversify that outreach, maybe to the chamber and some other folks on that. Second, I just want to note for everybody, please read ORS 431, 415, and 416. That's what our authorities are under the Board of Health. And this does not fall under that authority easily. So don't assume we have the ability to pass something countywide just because we have countywide Board of Health authority. That's limited by statute to only matters of local boards of health, public health, and if you read that, I think you'll understand it'd be far-reaching to try and attach Board of Health powers to climate action plan roles. So we truly only have jurisdiction over that 100,000 people or so that are in unincorporated Lane County about direct laws. So just I take care in that. So those are my only two pieces of input when it comes to developing this plan is, take care of what our actual role of Board of Health is, and also be aware of making sure we're doing true community outreach.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Next, Mr. Mokreisky, I'm turning to you to make sure I understand where I'm supposed to go now. And that is, as I understand it, we are now going to recess the Board of Commissioners for 5 minutes, go upstairs, and commence our meeting again, open to the public in the Board of Commissioners conference room, and finish up the rest of the meeting.
That's how I understand it.
That's how I understand it, too. Thank you so much. So we're recessing at 2:41, and we'll reconvene at 2:46. Going back on the record, thank you for our brief break, and we're ready now to have item 14A, and this will be our discussion regarding recruitment and retention.
Do we know the veteran's up
Is
with
it
us?
on?
We'll have Mr. Mokrohysky kick this off. I'm sure Ms. Holmes, our Director of Human Resources, will be making some remarks as well. Welcome.
Yeah, this is really, both of these items are for Ms. Holmes to lead, and she is prepared to do so. So take it away.
And Mr. Chair, as a reminder, I mentioned to you earlier, I am absolutely going to have to leave here around 3:30.
Okay. And you'll be excused to deal with hot water tanks or wherever else needs to happen.
World problems.
Yeah, first world problem.
We'll see how quickly we can move through as
But
much
it is
as
a
possible.
big first world problem.
So you're heating that with natural gas or solar?
All right. Mayor, Chair, Commissioners, again,
Thanks,
Alana
Jay.
Holmes, I'm the Human Resources Director here at the county. Today, we're here to have a discussion and share some information with you regarding the recruitment and retention audit that was conducted by the previous auditor, Dr. Creer. And then we'll share some information in response to that. So the overview for today will be to go through the 4 recommendations that are listed there, solutions, share also initiatives that are underway, and then take up just a little bit of time at the end to reflect on some successes around this topic as well. And then just a note before we move forward, a reminder that, you know, your packet, I think the memo was maybe 7 or 8 pages long, but really been trying to work with a volume of a report that was over 350 pages or so, or was it 550 pages? It was very extensive, and so I'm trying to just work at a really high level with selections from the auditors, comments directly, and then our responses to that. So the very first recommendation from the auditor had to do with Lane County's time management policy. And the main issue there was a concern by the auditor that there might be some language in our policies that would have an employee decide to delay giving us notice of when they might be leaving the organization, and that there might be opportunities to reframe our policy language to incentivize, if you will, employees to notify us sooner so that we have more time for transition planning for the work being done. So the auditor's recommendation was to remove any policies which would deter employees from making the government aware of their intent to leave. And as we discussed that recommendation, you know, we were in agreement that from time to time, we have had feedback in the organization about how that can sometimes get in the way of better workforce planning. So we kind of put together a committee, and there were 11 employees from 6 different departments that were selected to do the work. They've reviewed the policy. They have met multiple times to draft recommendations back to leadership, and we had hoped that those would come to us this month, but what we do know now is those are scheduled to come to the leadership team in January. They will present those as a committee to the leadership team. We will take those recommendations, review them, and once a decision has been made, we will direct them with the language to change in our Administrative Procedures Manual, our APM, to reflect those updates. We don't know what they all are yet, but it's a really good group of folks across the organization coming up with those recommendations. So that's our response.
Is that a subject of bargaining?
It possibly can be,
Okay.
and I won't know. Inga
Until
is
they
also
have,
part of.
until they have recommendations. that they-
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Next up is the topic of turnover. The auditor wanted to caution using turnover rates to gauge the success of an organization's health. And his recommendation was to develop, quote, positional turnover thresholds by conducting a multi-phasic situational analysis process which judges the cost and value of each position. And then, I'm not sure if you can see it, but I have an asterisk up there with additional information. As best as I can kind of frame this, what he would be asking is that we hire someone to look at a lot of information, including these costs listed, And not only would it be total compensation, but we'd be assessing every position in the organization, where they sit literally, if they do sit in an office environment, the size of their workspace, their cubicle environment, a larger office, calculate the square footage for that, cost of space, every supply that they utilize, pens, pencils, paper, computers, phones, any travel, any training and development, and there's some kind of formula that then you would assess the turnover cost for positions. As we reviewed that recommendation in the narrative, it definitely proved to be extremely complex. And we felt that with the incredible detail that would be required to go through that in tracking the costs and then the time spans to do the assessments, I believe he was asking for this to have 3-year look-backs for every calculation done for every employee. It would also require significant resources on behalf of the county. That would be in addition to finding a third-party consultant who would do this work, which I'm not really familiar with. We would have to, certainly put out an RFP and see what that would be like. But another added cost would be the resources internally across the organization that would have to gather where people sit, what's the square footage of where they sit, what's the cost of that for each building and percentage of building, and are we gonna start requiring people to track every supply that they utilize, et cetera. So it could be rather cumbersome of a process. But what we do want you to know is we do track turnover. And I know you all have probably heard our county administrator share information about this on a regular basis as we provide him with data on a quarterly basis. We're really having a focus on workforce analytics in HR as a result of one of the positions that was approved. And this is just one component that we will continue on in this new structure. And so I've copied up here our most recent data as of 12/9, just as an example of the types of things that we do track for turnover. So it does provide us with good information about when people are leaving, why people are leaving, and year over year, as the workforce grows and settles and FTE changes happen, getting a good picture on the percentage rates. So while you heard what the auditor's recommendation would be, we feel that the data that we're providing and the information there helps feed us what we need to know as far as the cycle of employment. I will talk later about other information that we collect that also is informative around retention of employees.
Before you go, the slide before this, did you try to describe what a multiphasic situation analysis process is? Is that sort of like everything?
So it was,
I'm sorry.
if I can I did try to read through this a few times, and I apologize for not being an expert in this area.
I'm just.
My understanding is on a yearly basis, we would do a 3-year look back for every FTE for all of the areas that I talked about to
Right.
cost what each position costs as far as then, I think the focus for the auditor is when we have turnover, what does it cost us? And so it would
your
be to
response
drive
is we're
that.
going to keep doing what we're doing. Thank you.
Somewhat. because in the conversations that we've had with leadership, we always know
I don't
the
disagree.
cost is fixed. We know what the cost is. We also know in our profession, there's a relative percentage of cost every time you have to go out for recruitment. When you think about the cost of the people involved in the interview panels, in the outreach, in any recruitments and advertising, all of those things are factored in. So we do know there
Right.
is cost,
Right.
but we're trying to balance that.
I just want to add to that, because I think this is an important piece here. There is a healthy attrition rate. So I think that we've talked a lot about organizations that are stagnant. Zero turnover is not what we're shooting for. We've had 63 individuals who've graduated from our Emerging Leaders Program. These are individuals who are interested in aspiring to be supervisors, but not yet. 63 individuals have graduated. Over close to 80%, between 70 to 80% of those graduates are women. And over 50% of those graduates have been promoted or are in career development within a year of graduating from that program. That's not happening if we don't have some movement in the organization. So when you look at the national research on this, the national average for state and local governments, they say about for an organization like ours, 10 to 20% turnover is a healthy rate, sort of depending on the environment. One thing that this data doesn't show, and I'm always asking HR for this information, but I'll bring this one up because you're gonna hear about it later today, is in our clinics. Healthcare clinics are significantly high turnover rate nationally. The average nationally for a healthcare clinic turnover is over 20%. Our clinics, this year, I know the number, because you gave it to me and I memorized it. This year, we're
You kept saying it to us.
we're at less than 9%. We're at 8.5% turnover within our clinic. So, we're tracking these things. If we get, there was a year in 2017, we were over 20%. That's cause for concern. That's cause to go, why is that? What's driving that churn? Because that's higher than we want it to be. But significantly, I'd argue significantly less than we're at is also not a great place to be.
And turnover doesn't even explain it. If people are turning over because they're doing so well and they've gotten so much support that they have other opportunities, I think that's wonderful.
Right. Well, we break it down by retirements. Retirements, people are going to retire when they retire. People that take other positions, people that are terminated within probation, relocation, reassignment, return to school, layoff. We haven't had any layoffs in 4 years or other. So we do break down all that data and we try to understand, again, a retirement's not something you control. What we want to know is if someone's taken another position, why? The next question is why? Is that because they were given, some people have graduated from our emerging leaders, then they've taken a position at the City of Eugene, right? So we're losing someone, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because that person is growing in their career. Maybe they'll come back at a later stage.
And I also think what that does is it starts to demonstrate we're an employer of choice. We have really quality talent here. And when people leave to move on and upwards, that says a lot about the county, and it also helps word of mouth for people that are watching locally. It says something about who we are and the kind of talent that we aspire to attract and to retain. Any other questions? Great conversation before we move on to the next slide. All right.
I'd like to make sure you get time to finish your presentation.
Okay, so the next, I think this was number 3 of the topics, was recruitment and retention regarding diversity. And really, the auditor was just wanting to make sure that we recruit and retain diverse employees, with his recommendation to produce a master plan that specifies which persons, according to ethnicity, gender, and age identifiers, would contribute to the actualization of a diverse workforce. And so our response, and we feel like part of the solution that we've had in place and that we're continuing to work towards, was this was a priority identified in the 2018 through 2021 strategic plan, to provide a safe, healthy, and inclusive work environment that attracts and retains the diverse and highly skilled workforce. So that is a focus of our work now. And there are several things that we've been doing as a result of that since the strategic plan was implemented. And I'll talk about a few of those in just a second. And then just to know that we seek to ensure thoughtful and consistent recruitment, selection, and retention processes. And so if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk about a few things here. One, when Dr. Krier came on board and we had discussions, I had only been here actually during his recruitment I was here just a few months. But I had an interest in doing a process review around our recruitments at that time. And once we found out this was the topic we thought we should hold. Since that time, we've restructured. We now have a talent management division, a talent acquisition and onboarding section. And so we're perfectly poised, and we have kickstarted off our talent acquisition process review, which will also then engage stakeholders in the organization. We'll have an equity lens of conversation and bringing folks in to really discuss what we're doing, where are our opportunities to improve, so that ultimately we are continually assessing the opportunities to cast a wider, broader net to diversify our applicant pools with the hopes to increase diversity hires. So that's first. And then second, you all might recall a few weeks ago, Laura Vinson was part of the presentation on equity updates. She is our talent acquisition coordinator. When she came on board in 2016, there were 3 equity goals: improve access to all open Lane County jobs, increase the diversity of applicant pools, and translate that increase in diverse applicants to hires. As we move forward with our restructure, we're definitely now in a place to better focus on that 3rd goal. And some of that, I think, is indicative of our 2019 data. At this point, 24% of applicants identify as a race other than white, which is an increase year over year since we started tracking this metric back in 2014, where the percentage was 15.9%. Hires across the department as of the end of October this year, we hired 337 people. And 81 of those identify as a race other than white, which is 24% of hires to date. So those are good informational numbers. We still have work to do, but definitely showing our that when we focus our work to attain these goals, we're moving in the right direction. And then another piece that comes up in attracting talent, especially in the labor market we've been in at least the last year, 18 months, with people really having the choice of where they'd like to work, is time to fill positions. And in 2015, before Laura came on board, time to fill was 85 days per position. So from the time someone, said, we need to fill this position to the time, that offer was signed. In 2019, that's gone down to 62 days, which is a 27% reduction in time to fill positions. Of the positions filled in this calendar year, 30% we were able to fill under 40 days from time to fill, time to hire. So we're incrementally improving that process, and we'll continue because we know the shorter the time span, the more engaged we can keep those candidates that we are seeking to bring on board. Next, I would just want to talk about some of the other opportunities for success that we've had. And I know you've heard about these employee engagement initiatives several times, but when I referred to the strategic plan and the initiatives that were outlined, these directly tie to that. We had over 50 employees in our organization at all levels involved in each of these initiatives. And we think these will definitely help to address areas of recruitment, especially once people come on board into the retention. When you look at what's listed up here, things like stay interviews, career development, are things that we've heard our employees that are here now have a lot of interest in. I would also just call out that we conduct a biannual employee engagement survey. So that's really important. We seek feedback from every employee in this organization. And we've received the survey results and are working with leadership in the organization to roll out the information within departments and for all employees in the very near future. So that will then be shared out. And then I would say, going back to that equity update that you had a few weeks ago, where Mo, Laura, Aaron, and folks from the Equity and Access Advisory Board presented to you, you heard a lot of other work being done in the organization that's really robust. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity cohort of employees at Lane County that are attending that to help build an updated framework around equity work. Currently, there have been facilitated conversations between executive leadership, this board, internal equity committees, and the GARE cohort to talk about where are our priorities, how to better focus and align our priorities with equity moving forward into the coming year. Those conversations will also lift up this work and help inform us as we frame how we're doing our talent process, review work on these initiatives, and opportunities to better enhance the work as we go forward. And then Mo did talk about employee resource groups, and we have a pilot of those that will be rolling out in the new year, and those statistically also show retention of diverse employees in organizations when those are in place. Well, the fourth and last recommendation was to, recruitment and retention regarding a countywide survey. So the issue there is to improve recruitment and retention of our workforce, and Dr. Creer felt we must hear, listen, and act on the very voices of our workforce. And the recommendation was in lieu of a primary stakeholder survey. There were questions that he asked across the organization as he was laying the groundwork for his audit report. And basically, he's saying that a couple of those questions should be incorporated into the HR work, and then the third question should be sifted into each department and work group for follow-up to better the county's attractiveness as an employer. So what I would respond to with that are a few things. One, the survey questions that the auditor used are not dissimilar to the 4 questions that we will be rolling out in our Stay Interview pilot program in the first quarter of 2020. So while they're not the questions that he utilized in this process, these are the 4 questions that were developed by the committee of employees that worked on the Stay Interview initiative. So I think we'll still get to a lot of that same information. Why are you here? What makes you stay at the county? What as a supervisor can I do to help you be successful and continue in your role at the county? And it's really an opportunity for a rich dialogue between the employee and their supervisor and helping to continue to build and foster those relationships. And we will be able to access data from those stay interviews. And over time, that will be very informative for us. And we will continue to use all employee surveys. Those biannual surveys on employee engagement are very informative when we look at trends and people take the time to provide comments that we assess that help us figure out where we're on the right track, where there might be some areas that we have opportunities that we might not have thought about. We'll continue with those surveys. And then exit surveys. I think County Administrator referred a little bit to that. When people leave, if we know that they're leaving, we will reach out to provide them with an opportunity to sit down and have an exit interview with us to share the information more than just the data numbers. So we will continue to do that. And then the data from these sources that are on the slide will help us monitor employee engagement and retention on an ongoing basis. And then just a snapshot, I want to be mindful of the time, of just some other successes that we're having in the organization right now. These certainly aren't all of them, but a few that I think are relative to the topic today. I think you all are familiar with our centralized internship program that was started in 2017. Since it was created, we've hosted 40 interns. We've hired 6 into regular full-time positions and 5 into part-time or temporary positions. So of those 11 that have been hired, 8 identify as a race other than white. We've also hosted 2 interns from the Oregon Commission for the Blind and hosted 2 interns this past summer from the University of Oregon Student Athlete Internship Program. And while we're providing them with an opportunity for an internship, I can definitely tell you the richness that we receive in those opportunities. We learn so much when we bring interns in and they share their experiences with us and they provide presentations, and the work that they do is so valuable. We will continue with that successful program. An increase in our number of equity summits. We have added 4 Equity 101 half-day sessions. They'll be offered on a quarterly basis, and we will continue with the 2 equity summits that have been offered twice a year on a variety of topics that, we really look to see what's topical and timely for the organization every year, and then we bring forward whatever those topics are in those other 2 summits. And then something new for us was we put out a competitive process for employees who might be interested in being equity facilitators in the organization. And once that process was complete, I think is it 6? We have 6 employees who have been trained to be equity facilitators. So opportunities to stretch, opportunities to work in areas of passion outside the regular scope of their regular positions. They will be the ones facilitating these 4 Equity 101 summits. So really excited for that opportunity. This is something new that we're trying to engage more employees around the organization on that topic. So with this, I'm completing my component of the presentation and Chair, I would turn this back over to you for questions and board discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you so much for all this great work going into looking at those recommendations and your feedback on them. Commissioners, do you want to ask questions, make comments, otherwise engage in discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Alana, wow, thank you. I like the way you very systematically address the different questions that are being posed. And just a tiny little bit of history on the work that Dr. Krier did. It originally was a smaller project than it turned out to be. It was originally just more or less a snapshot in time that we're asking for. That how are we doing as a county, as an organization, as far as equity is concerned, as far as our hiring practices and our actual retention rates current. It quickly became more of a history of what have we done, and there was far more data that was sought and included in the final report than was originally intended to be in the report. Now, Dr. Krier didn't do that. He wasn't acting on his own in that. It was directed along the way to make certain that it was a complete report. So the report that we got really is difficult to read. I've not really heard anybody who's disagreed with me on that. It's difficult to glean a great deal of information out of it because there's so much information in there. I think that what you've done is you've taken the very different points of it and you've applied it to the function of your department as a whole. And really, I'm anxious to hear what other commissioners have to say, but I really appreciate the way you've actually taken the questions and, as Commissioner Burney said, thank you very much, but we'll do what we're doing. That's not 100% the case, but really applying what we're doing to what the recommendations are and saying that really, practically, that is what we're doing already, or what we're doing gives us perfectly satisfactory, not satisfactory, but exemplary results the way we're already doing them. And just one more tiny little bit of history. When I'd been here a little less than a year, we fired the administrator, and we did a nationwide search. And the nationwide search ultimately gave us a small handful of white men to choose from for the administrator. And we chose the right person. I mean, I think we could search for the entire United States, and I would not, but one of the very first discussions I had with Mr. Mokrajewski was, we have an equity question that we need to answer. And you stepped into it immediately. I mean, you didn't waste any time in moving forward with beginning to address, I'm just saying the term equity, but it really is hiring practices, retention practices, supervisory practices, and really the mileage that we've gained since that day, back in 2012 we came on board. 2014.
But who's counting?
Yeah. But you just run together. When you're my
Not that you're keeping track.
and I remember the day I was standing on a tarmac. I remember that. But really, at some point, just looking at these numbers, you can see how far we've come in the last few years. Now that's one step in the journey. But really, I'm anxious to hear what other commissioners have to say about it. But I'm very impressed with the people that you have surrounded yourself with in your department, and the work that you're doing, including new positions and reinvigorating old positions. And it's it really is almost mind-boggling how much work you have done since 2014 and since you came on board. How long did you work for the city before you came here?
For over 10 years.
Over 10 years.
And tomorrow will be 2 years of exciting times here at the county. Seriously, it's been an incredible opportunity and experience.
Were you there when Greg Rickoff was still there running the
Yes,
Human Rights
we
Commission?
crossed over a little bit as I left the UVO, then he went to the UVO.
So you know the history of the Eugene's efforts. and stuff.
Human rights, yes.
Thank you.
Good. Other commissioners?
I'll go.
Commissioner Buck?
I appreciate you delving into the report itself. It was a major read, which I read. And I know that we're not incorporating every suggestion. But I still think it pointed out some issues that we have to just be conscious of. And make sure that when we are doing recruitment retention, that we're incorporating the equity lens that you're so clearly implementing. And also the thoughts and input from our workforce to us. And there were some suggestions about, when somebody leaves and their extra time that they've had, and there are things in there that we need to change, and I know that you're addressing those too. But I do feel like what you've moved through is progress on that initial report, and I look forward to seeing how it actually unfolds in practicality as we move forward.
Okay, Commissioner Bernie?
I got nothing.
Commissioner Bozovich?
It's good, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I said I got nothing. I was going to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
I apologize. So were you at Eugene when Myrnie was HR?
When she was in risk,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
we were on the same floor in the Woolworth building together.
That's
Yes.
great. I got nothing to say other than I'm 100% supportive of what you laid out. Makes sense to me. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was going to say, you guys are doing great work, and the statistics that got passed around here support that. Particularly in the health clinics, it's just kind of an amazing turnaround there, how they went from being, greater turnover than the rest of the county to now less turnover than the rest of the county. Those trends have crossed over each other. And I like that you tied some of this back to our 2018 strategic plan, because that was we had a strategic plan coming into that where we talked about some of these things, but in 2018 we chose to pull out that fourth set of goals. Originally it was just, safe, healthy county, robust infrastructure, and vibrant communities were the three separated goals. And in 2018 we wrapped in, there it is, that fourth one about people and partnerships, because we wanted to specifically talk about the human capital side of the business we do. And this was one of those goals, and I think you're showing that it's starting to bear a lot of fruit, from our internship programs to our leadership training within the county. I think you're doing some good things, and I just continue on with everything you've outlined. I support where we're headed.
Thank you.
Could you get the slide up with the turnover data? I want to ask you a question about that. If you took out the retirements, what do you think that turnover rate number would be?
We've got the person who ran the numbers with us today.
It looks like
So Crystal is
it looks like
crunching those numbers.
looks like we had 43, 37, 53, 72, 29. So we've had in that range of 40 plus retirements.
Roughly a third to quarter to a third of the percent.
You oftentimes can track legislative sessions where
That's
the
what I was
change
just
is
gonna
made
say.
to PERS.
Yeah.
And then in December of that year, you will typically see a higher number. If you look at 2017 and 2019, the numbers are higher
Yeah.
than they were in 2018.
Should have seen 2004.
For this year?
For 2019.
So they said if you took that out, it would be a roughly 10% turnover rate, Chair?
Yeah. So it would seem to me that if you had a really high rate into the 20s or beyond, then people are leaving, maybe jumping ship comes to mind as a terminology, that they're leaving because it's not a good fit and they're not happy and they're happier elsewhere. If we take the retirements out and we go, well, okay, those people are probably going to retire from whatever organization they were in, and they just happen to be in this one at the point of their retirement, that to me isn't as significant of a number as the overall turnover rate, excluding retirements. But if it doesn't really change, because those numbers, the high is 72, the low is 29, it may not be that big of a thing. But I would say also on the other end, the low end, the 10%, what is our lowest number up there would be 10.7, 10.8%. If we are not, if people aren't leaving for opportunity and they're just staying, and on the positive side, it would be, it's a good place to work, and I love working here, and let's put the positive, but then the negative comes up in my own head, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, those people can't go anywhere. They're not capable of going anywhere, and we want people that, really want to, what's a Saturday Night Live, explore the space of their job. Okay, 2 people in the room got that. And yeah, thank you, Mr. Administrator. But we want employees, and maybe those numbers are just a tiny amount of the real story. But I agree that if we get any lower than that, because we're on the low end of that 10 to 20% range that was mentioned, I think, by the county administrator. So to me, that's something to be making sure that we are having opportunities for those folks that are going through the growth process, the leadership, the internship, all that. So if we don't have much room, if things are too stable, But I think Commissioner Farr's reference to the bad old days in terms of high retirements, people getting out because of fear of attacks on their retirement benefits, or maybe downsizing because of a substantial drop in type of revenue. We have to lay off people, which I guess during that period, we only had one layoff year, right? You said no layoffs for 4 years, and that's 5 years.
I don't count that one because it was grant funding that went away. It wasn't a county choice to lay someone off. But
Okay.
yes, technically, yes, that was.
Okay, so basically we have very little over the lengthy period here. We got there's no total on return to school or layoff. There's no total on the right side of the graph, is there? No. No, that's okay. So my point is that, those layoff numbers, which total 16 over the entire period of roughly, I guess, July 1, 2014 to present, that's pretty low, really low. And if you looked at an historic number, if you looked at a number following a recession or a huge loss in timber revenue or whatever, you would see bigger numbers in terms of layoff. So we're pretty stable, and that's good. So is there anything else, Ms. Holmes, that you think the board should be looking at that was a recommendation of that report? In other words, there's something that jumps out that we should be aware of, like these make a recommendation, and that's really important to the community, to the organization, of all the work that in all of his recommendations.
I don't know if I would be able to speak directly to the auditor's recommendations, but just a couple of things. I know when the audit was presented to the Performance Audit Committee, for example, one of the members had turned and said, "I'd really like to know, hear from you, did you learn anything, or what are your takeaways from this audit?" And my response was, it was helpful in helping to determine we're on the right track. The topics, the themes are kind of ancillary to things that I knew from when I came on board, or things that our team and in the organization had been discussing. We were very fortunate, I feel, through the work that was done in the creation of the 2018 to 2021 strategic plan, it wasn't done in isolation. There was a lot of community involvement. Employees from across the organization had a very high response rate, either by surveys or when we held drop-in sessions and employees showed up. So they really informed a lot of the work around our People in Partnerships component, and their feedback helped us to determine where we were going to focus our initiatives on. So that's, I think, speaking a little bit also to Commissioner Buck about employees and them being, listening and hearing from them and having an active role in the work that's being done, that's definitely been demonstrated through the employee engagement initiatives. And it's not done in isolation. I regularly attend the Equity and Access Advisory Board meetings. We present to them on multiple topics. We take feedback from them. They're helping to inform our landscape of work, and they have, really great questions of us. And so I think for us to do our best work, it is a 360 world that we live in, from community, from employees, from folks in our department. I'm very fortunate to have an extremely talented and passionate team, and it all comes together to help figure out the work that we're doing.
Okay, good. Anything further? I think we're done.
Just one last thing on the numbers for departures. There are only a couple on there that really you need to pay a great deal of attention to, and that's the other reasons. Each one of those 34 other reasons, it'd be nice to anecdotally know what those reasons are. For you, I don't need to know, but unless it's something that you need to know. And I'm sure you do that in the form of exit interviews. And the other one is resignation. Is there a mitigating factor in the resignation? I've made no secret that for years and years, I was responsible for the hiring of a pretty large local employer, Jerry's. Now, that being said, there was a much higher turnover rate than that built into companies like Jerry's, where we're hiring people for the first time. And you're hiring professionals predominantly. I mean, the people here are in professional positions. So it's important to know if people leave for a reason that's not listed above, then why are they doing it? And if we have a trend there, that's when you really begin to identify this and then do something about systematically or systemically. So good, excellent work. I think
Okay.
really pleased with the results.
Okay, I think we are ready to conclude this item. I know Commissioner Forrest is excused, has to deal with an important problem. So now, next up is item 14B.
Good luck, Pat.
The updates. Updates to process, format, and timeline for performance reviews of board employees. And I guess I'll turn it over to Ms. Holmes.
Again?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. This second item is something that we're looking forward to walking through the information to present to you based on your request to really look at the process and the administration of performance evaluations for employees that report directly to the board. And really fortunate to have had good conversations with all of you and the employees that do report to you to get some reflection about what that process can look like. I then worked closely with Erin Rollins, who is our training and organizational development, and we're very fortunate to have her expertise in the organization, as well as with Ryan, our talent manager. And for today, we thought having our subject matter expert on all things performance would best serve all of us. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and she's going to walk us through the presentation, and then we'll make sure to have plenty of time for discussion and questions from all of you. All right, Erin?
All right, thank you. So, employees who report to the Board of County Commissioners are required per their employment agreement to have an annual review. And the board also, within that process, has the ability to grant a merit increase if there is one available at that time. So we wanted to look first, kind of review and summarize the current process. So for the past few years, the performance reviews of board employees were similar in a few aspects to the reviews that were conducted for all county employees, but not in every area. So there were some differences. The most recent review process included a self-assessment that the employee completed and turned into Human Resources. That then was forwarded to the board by Human Resources. There was a 360-degree feedback component where the employee submitted a list of names of feedback providers to Human Resources. That included all of their direct reports, if they have direct reports, key staff members within the county, community, constituents, folks from other jurisdictions that they may have had the opportunity to work with throughout the course of the year, made up that list. Human Resources sent a link to an anonymous survey to that list for people to provide feedback, and then we would roll up that feedback and provide a summary document that summarized the trends as well as the ratings from that 360 feedback. HR then would prepare a board memo that summarized the 360 feedback and the ratings, and provided a rating recommendation based on that information to be a starting point for conversation. The board would meet with the employee in executive session, would review the information, and ultimately arrive at the performance rating that would be given to the employee. Then we would come into public session where you would summarize the performance, document the performance rating, as well as vote on a merit if a merit was applicable in this situation with that. Also, we wanted to go ahead and point out that historically we have been late on performance reviews, so they weren't always done in a timely manner along the way. So after this latest round of performance reviews in the summer of 2019, you gave us instruction to go forth and do some research into some possible modifications to the process, which is what the bulk of this conversation is about. So feedback was gathered from a variety of sources. We talked, as Alana had mentioned, to the commissioners. We talked to the board employees. We also reached out to some of our comparator counties to get information about their processes as well. And we received some feedback on several areas. So in terms of the timing of the review, we received feedback that there was an interest in potentially moving the timing of the county administrator's review to after the budget cycle, since that is a key component of his performance. To stagger the timing of reviews so you weren't having to work on multiple reviews all at the same time. Shifting the review timing so that the 60-day notice period that is mentioned in the employment agreements can be worked into that timing, so there is time if performance is not satisfactory in order for some changes potentially to be made, and to explore either annual or every other year timing. We received feedback on both of those timing aspects. We received feedback around the 360 survey process, everything from keep it the same, we like it, to maybe the board wanted to have a little bit more participation in terms of how the names were selected or a conversation about the names as well in that area. When we looked at the actual evaluation processes used by comparator counties, we learned that we do have a couple counties that don't have a process for their board employees, one of which was very interested in hearing about what we would do at the end of this project. We piqued their interest. Others had processes that were similar in that they contained self-assessments, they contained 360 components, they contained discussions, both in executive session and in public session. And one county who used the 360 feedback used it as a developmental tool. So it was used for personal growth and development of the employee and did not have any bearing whatsoever on the performance rating that the employee had. So they made a separation on how they used that tool. In one case, each person on the elected board provided written individual feedback and ratings that were then brought to the broader conversation. So everyone independently created basically a manager evaluation and on their own prior to the group conversation. So there was a variety of things that we learned. We would like you to consider the following for the board employees' performance reviews. And so the first broader recommendation is to move a little bit closer to the process that is used for all county employees. So what we have been doing is similar, but there's still areas of differences. So in terms of frequency, we do want to have you consider continuing on the annual timeline. It is in alignment with the review process for all county employees as well as common practice. In addition, the county administrator has been a passionate advocate for annual performance reviews for all employees here at the county. And so we feel that having his review also, as well as other board employees, continue on that annual basis is an important message to the county employees overall, that we're being consistent there. With the categories, our recommendation is to keep the standard categories that we have now, which are represented by the 3 circles. The first is the core behaviors. So the county's core behaviors are worth 25%. Our leadership competencies are worth another 25%. And then the job-related goals and actual accomplishments and results are worth 50%. And what this does is effectively balances how the employee goes about completing their job duties with the actual results and what they are accomplishing, and keeps that in balance. For the timing, we're looking at adjusting the timing based on the feedback, based on the fiscal year calendar for the county administrator, and also to allow for that 60-day time period to be worked into the timing. However, that does require that we would need to be renegotiating employment agreements in order to align that timing appropriately there. To give you an idea of what that timing would look like, we have a timeline here. So if we look at the county administrator in terms of the top wide bar, the county administrator's review period would be July 1st through June 30th. And then that would mean then the following July is when the 360 and the self-assessment would be completed. That information would be returned with the board completing the review during the month of August. And then we would have the months of September and October basically make up that 60-day notice period. So the employment renewal date would have to shift to November 1st. That way we align the budget cycle as well as allow for that 60-day review period. The second line would be for county council. We just, as an example, shifted that by 1 month, so they would be staggered. And should there be a third board employee, those dates would be set based on when that employee would start their position and make sure it doesn't overlap with the other 2 that would be in flight with that. As far as the process, we are recommending some modifications. We would still like to see we continue with the self-assessment where the employee is completing that self-assessment and returning it to Human Resources to be forwarded on to you with all of that information. There's a couple modifications to the 360 feedback survey process. We would still have the employee prepare their list of names, again, keeping with the direct reports. Other participants familiar with the employee's work, such as key staff, outside partners, other jurisdictions and key constituents or customers. But then the employee would sit down with the board and review that list of names with the goal of arriving at a mutually agreed upon list of names to provide the 360 feedback. Human Resource would then send out the list, the survey to those folks, and again, we would continue to roll up the feedback and provide you with information on trends and a roll-up of the ratings so that you could get a picture of that feedback. In terms of the actual evaluation conversation, we did want to propose the option to you to have each commissioner review the self-assessment and that 360 feedback independently and be able to have the opportunity to provide feedback individually in your own individual rating. So we are adding this here as a point for consideration, and we can have conversation if that's something that you would like to do. similar to what the other jurisdiction had done when we had done some of our research. But whether or not you adopt that option or not, we would still have the executive session where all the feedback received would be discussed with the employee and the human resources director, and in that session arrive ultimately at the ultimate performance rating for the employee. We would then come out into public session, similar to what you're doing, give the summary of the performance review and the rating, and again, award a merit increase if it's applicable and available based on the salary scale for the employee. The final step is actually moving the board order and the process to document the performance review to the next board meeting following when you're discussing the performance, so that is a shift in timing. So at the next available board meeting, a board order would be prepared where we would document the performance of the employee and the performance rating and document that merit increase and have it passed at that time. Also, at a time following that board meeting, our recommendation is that the board sit down with the board employee and set goals at the beginning of the review period in terms of what are the job goals and expectations that then would be reviewed over the course of the coming year. It is our recommendation as well that both the board employees and the board make sure we're making time and space throughout the course of the year to receive periodic feedback on the progress towards those goals, to discuss accomplishments or if there's any concerns, and just to make sure that by the time you do prepare the review at the end of the performance review, it's a holistic look because you have been having these touch bases throughout the course of the review period. And so that's the summary, and we'd like to pause now for any kinds of questions that you might have.
Okay, Commissioner Bozovich?
So first, I'll just say I support the timing changes and the necessary contract revisions that go with that. I'm also good with the board review of the 360 universe and having some input there. What I want to concentrate on a little bit is the 50% of the evaluation that's on goals. When I was supervising employees, that's kind of where I spent most of my annual evaluations on, was about reviewing those goals and then setting the goals for the next year. There's nothing in this process, and there has never been any process really formal process where the board's involved in the goal setting and describing those goals. So one of the things in your, if you want to go back a slide, I'd like to see in that initial self-assessment that gets shared with the board, at that same time a proposal of goals for the upcoming year gets shared. And we come, as we get into the evaluation, we're agreeing to that set of goals or adding or subtracting from it. Because really it has to be an agreed on shared goals between the employer, the board, and the employee, whoever that is. I think that's a really important piece that seems to have gotten sort of lost in this process, is that development of goals. To me, I much prefer spending my time doing evaluations, looking forward, and talking about how the employee is going to grow and how we're going to keep things moving in a good direction, rather than constantly on the backward look of what the 360 said or what goals were met. That's more somewhat more important to me, is that forward-looking aspect of annual evaluations. And I perceive that this will be this one of the things as we either replace or hire a performance auditor. As we look at the contracting in the future for any of these positions, we'll need to have the contracts set up to expire in that November time period, or whatever the correct time period is to have the 60 days available. So if they get hired in April, we'll have to do a contract that spans a year and so many months, and then set the annual review up for that. Try and be sensitive to knowing that, so we don't end up with this situation of having to renegotiate to make it match. So that if we do adopt this going forward, I think it's a good idea for the board to make that part of our hiring policy, to make sure our initial contract allows for going to a date that works with this process. So those are my comments on the whole thing. I think overall, I think what you propose seems to work out pretty well, especially seeing, I like the part where it's a shared agreement on the list between the employee and all, because I'm sure that the employee may have some input about, well, that person really has no idea what I do, and I never, think about county council, having somebody be on that list that is not somebody that is directly given legal advice at all and is not a client of county council may not make complete sense. So having a union president, say, be part of a 360 review. That's sort of, have to, and having that discussion with the employee maybe might be really useful to make sure that we do have a right, if we're going to start suggesting people to be part of that universe, that there's a shared agreement about that.
Okay, other commissioners? Commissioner Buck?
As someone that had a real problem with timing of the reviews last time, I really appreciate you going into this depth and reviewing the whole thing, because this really incorporates all the issues that I personally had with first go around. I'm a bit indifferent on the option in the center. I would probably go either way depending on what the rest of the board members are interested in. I definitely agree with the goal setting. I think that is important. And overall, I'm very supportive of the changes. I won't go into, all the concerns I had initially, because I think that you thoroughly understood where I was coming from, and we had a good conversation about that. And this, satisfies all those issues.
My first experience with this was we have 2 whole employees. I mean, this sounds like we're talking about a cast of thousands here. We have 2 employees. We have relationships with them. My understanding was the general counsel hadn't been evaluated for quite a long time.
A year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah.
I think one that I think got skipped.
So 1 out of 3. I have no problem with doing them at the same time. I have no problem. Maybe I'm in the minority, but I disagree that we have to have a list to send out that everybody agrees on. I think minority opinion is very important, and in the board discussion, that can be nuanced however it needs to be. But I don't agree that the employee is the only person that provides a list. I think that there's an innate subjectivity and a bias towards talking to people that will be positive about the employee. I think every board member ought to be able to add to that list, and staff ought to have that opportunity. And whether there's this is my input, whether there's general agreement or not, I don't need a consensus. I'd like various people's opinions. I have a real problem with that 360 because it was so subjective, and then every observation was based on what percent of people agreed with what, and it was frustrating for me. So generally looks good. Those are my things. I would time them both at the same time. A lot of this to me seems like getting back to basic management, right? Just timing it sequentially in such a way that it relates to budget. Doing it, I think there should be more board discussion in executive committee. As I recall, we were presented information in executive committee. We had to have that discussion, then we came out because it felt like we were running against the clock, and maybe that's incorrect. But I would love to front end this, and I really agree with what Jay said about a big part of this should be looking forward as well as looking backward. So that's done together and discussed and debated together. I would welcome a discussion with either of our employees where they push back on certain things, because I find when that occurs, I understand more about some of the presses and demands that they're under. So I don't know if you can build all that in, but that's my response to what's been presented.
Okay, thank you. I just gonna ask a few questions. So is the term 360 evaluation, is that a patented term, a trademark term, a copyrighted term, or just means a big evaluation?
It just means doing an evaluation of people who surround you from all angles.
Okay.
So, it could be people above you, people below you, people you deal with in variety different
Yeah.
aspects of your
Well,
job.
I think one of the critiques I would have of the current use of the term 360 evaluation is, since the administrator or auditor or county council is providing that list, they may not be aware of all those. I would really call it more of a 36 degree rather than 360 degree. In other words, it's from the perspective of the person doing the job. And I think that a approach that Commissioner Burney was kind of advocating, that is, the employee puts names on the list and commissioners put names on the list, and then you have the list. That to me is a little broader than just some kind of negotiation process of, oh, I don't like the names that the county council put on the list. We can't agree. To me, it's like, well, why don't you just have lots of names and the evaluation takes place? I mean, to me, it'd be better to have more names in the mix. And I think that everybody involved in the discussion, i.e. the employee and the board, will kick out any evaluations that look suspect in terms of too friendly or too hostile, or however people would view those. The second thing I would say is that I'm okay with the board individually evaluating it. I will point out that there are, and we should run this by the legal people, but I think that becomes a public record. And so one of the disadvantages of that approach is the directness with which you can have discussions in an executive session. So I might just say, by way of feedback, I don't have any problem doing that, but what it tends to do is it tends to have the more positive and more nebulous comments, because people then become aware, it becomes public, commissioners, where if we have a discussion where each commissioner in an executive session gives their feedback, you don't have that concern. So I'm more in favor of that latter option. Also, that option would also deal with something else, which is I totally agree that the evaluation, the 50% part, shouldn't just be about the past. It should also be about the future. So how do you envision having a discussion of the future, or is it all one big executive session in your mind?
So what happens for the current employees, because we're trying to move a little closer, is, and I'll go back to some of the 360 comments as well, because I get those questions from supervisors all the time when we're talking about the performance reviews in 360s. We want to make sure with the 360s that the employee gets to bring forward their names, because they know who they've been working with a lot. And sometimes supervisors are really nervous that they're going to only pick their best friends, and they're only going to pick people who will say nice things and positive things. And then that's where the conversation between the supervisor and employee comes in to help round out that list and to come up with that mutually agreed upon list. So it becomes a bit of a back and forth where...
Is that in an executive session, or is that via email, or how does
This
that
is with our
occur?
regular employees.
Okay.
It's, typically it's a one-on-one meeting. I mean, it's in a meeting. Here's my list, what do you think?
Yep.
Recently did my review with Alana. I gave her my list, and she's like, oh, you forgot this person, and I want to hear this one. What do you think? So we had a conversation. So it's not a surprise to the employee who's getting the request, so they don't feel like something's happening behind their back. So we're just trying to be very transparent about it with our regular employees. Again, you have the discretion to take this where you feel you need it to be. And then with the goal setting, we're trying to have goal conversations indeed happening at the beginning of the review period, to Commissioner Bosovich's comments, that at the beginning of the review period, here's our goals, here's what we want our accomplishments to be, here's your targets, here's the things that are important to have at the beginning of the review period, so the employees know what success looks like and what they're aiming for. So again, it's very transparent. At the end of the review period, when you do the review, oops, I have to go the right way, then we're evaluating what happened in the past year based on, in the three categories, the competencies, the core behaviors, and how did you perform towards those goals we set, ideally a year ago. And as you're discussing that performance, the conversation just typically does naturally evolve into, okay, now, so where do we go now for the next year? Because there may be something that you want the employee to work on that becomes a goal for going forward in the next year. Maybe we didn't quite get there on something, we need more time. So it really does kind of become this circular process. And then with those ongoing conversations throughout the course of the year, touching base and saying, are we on track to the goals and the targets, and how are things going? And do we need to change them? All of a sudden, is there a huge change and a shift that we have to adapt for? And one goal becomes obsolete halfway through the year, we need to replace it with a new one. So it is meant to be dynamic, and ideally we're in a position where those goals are set up front, then that's what you're evaluating, and you just transition into setting those next goals, and it just continues in a cyclical manner. And that's where we're trying to get with all of the employees across the county, slowly but surely, so that everyone is having that kind of process.
I do favor having this whole evaluation process and consultation process occur in the second half of a calendar year. And as Commissioner Burney pointed out, we're not talking about huge numbers here, so maybe we should just do it all at once rather than, that way, in terms of the board scheduling, every year at the end of the budget cycle, all of this happens. Otherwise, I'm afraid, this is based on some experience, that things will just keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and that is the history of this is, oh, this person's doing a good job, they're doing a good job, so, you know, it's just pushed and pushed. And it's only if the employee insists that it really happens. So to me, having a finite period, just a thought, because, you know, and maybe it's that much more work for you to do it, and that's a reason why staggering the work for both the board and the staff is important. I mean, I guess I'll go either way, but the other thing is, I think I'm the one that suggested it be every 2 years because of the 2-year cycle of the Board of Commissioners, and that the new people coming in potentially or actually are on the ground typically between January and you know, and in their first 6 months, and then they would then be the opportune time for them would be after a bit of time here, but also the 60 days protects against just assuming that the employee is going to be given a good rating and going to be continued. So I think the idea of that 60-day notice and protecting the board's authority under that portion of the standard contract is really important. And so maybe having it, everything starting July 1, which I guess is where you have it anyway. You have it starting then for the county administrator, but maybe everything, right now we only have 2, so like Commissioner Burney said, it's not like we have a cast of thousands. But I think that I'm persuaded if you think it's a good idea to do it every year. My concern is that we've had as far as I can tell, one time when the board said no or got rid of the employee one time in my 23 years here. So it's not like that happens. I think I'd like to really highlight it by having it every 2 years. Also, the new commissioners, when they come in, and most commissioners do come in on January 2, 3, 4 of an odd numbered year. We have had commissioners appointed in mid-cycles, but from the commissioners' side of it, you know, maybe all things considered, having it, you know, July 1 would be better than waiting. And also having the magnitude of the decision be made for the remainder of that 18 months of that 2-year period. Or actually, it's a 2-year period that would commence July 1st, roughly, of every 2 years. So I just don't want to have the process eat up all this time when the reality is only one time in multiple years has the board said, oh, we hired this person, we're working with them all the time closely, and oh, by the way, we want to trigger the 60 days and get rid of them. It just never happens. So I'm wondering why we have to have the 2 years. No, you know, obviously we have lots of opinions on this, and quite frankly, I'm more inclined to just say, you've come up with a good plan, I'm for it. Commissioner Buck, then Commissioner Bernie.
I just wanted to go back to the 360 real quick, because I think fellow commissioners have brought up a good point about, you know, this list of who you give it out to. You know, there could be a point where people disagree about who should be on that list, and then what do? Do you have the board vote on who is and isn't allowed on that list? I mean, it could get kind of sticky. I think, yes, employees know who they work with, and there's validity to that. It could also be like, okay, each commissioner gets to pick a handful of people and who they choose to be on that 360, because I don't want to get into this situation where you're starting the review period with your 2 main employees and you're already in the argument about who's going to be on the list for the review. I feel like that is a bad way to start off the whole cycle. And so how do you alleviate the problem of people may not agree on probably a very few amount of people that would be on that list? I think we have to resolve that particular issue up front. I don't know exactly how to do that or what we might agree on to do that. But I think there should be some leeway for the board members to be able to pick a couple of people, and that may or may not be the people that you would choose. To the year contract, I would prefer annual reviews. And I like the way that you presented at least a 1 month delay. You know, as a business owner, I would never hire all my employees and have all the reviews on the same day. I know we're only talking about 2 people here, so it's not that huge of an issue.
Soon to be 3.
But maybe 3, depending on where we go with that. You know, for the most part, I really am supportive of your recommendations with one caveat is we've got to figure out a resolution to this list this year.
Okay, Joe, and then Jay?
I think I stated something that's consistent with what Heather stated already. I just want to say that in terms of the chair's remarks, if the entire purpose of an evaluation is to decide if we're going to hire and fire, then maybe once every 5 years. But I don't think that's the whole purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that there's the continual improvement and the communication and the focus on upcoming goals as well as past goals. That Steve's educated me quite a bit. You know, I have these ideas, but discussion is good. So I would just vote that we do it annually, if that's even a subject for anyone, minimum. But I think it's constant, right? It's continual.
Yeah. So I think with setting the timing of the review to be, July at the earliest prevents, hopefully in normal election cycles, not appointments, from having to do a review without at least 6 months of experience.
Right.
I mean, we let new board members vote on a budget with 5 months of experience. So,
Hey, I didn't even
and
want to
even
vote on
even
some
less
of
than
that.
that. So if you know what I mean, you're making decisions from, the first. I remember a couple quasi judicial decisions that were in January last year with new board members. So on land use stuff. So it's annual. I don't have a problem with annual because I think it's one of the incumbent things about being a board member is getting up to speed on who your direct employees are and having an opinion about them. I will say with the 360 and this is true for goal setting, there may be differences of opinion between the board, individual board members or the board as a whole and the employee. Hopefully we can work that out, or it's a signal that maybe we need to be having a much further conversation. But there may be times when one of us picks somebody and that person on that list might just happen to be involved in litigation or something like that we're not aware of, or a grievance or something else that we maybe, the employee would be able to educate us on in executive session, and we can choose maybe not to send that person a 360 questionnaire. There may be good reason for why that person's not on the list, or the fact that they just have no interaction with that person. It seems to me we should be able to come to a conversation and an agreement about that with the employee. If we can't, that's a sign. If there's somebody you want on the list and the employee's adamant that there shouldn't be and you guys can't come to an agreement, that's sort of, should be a hint. Same thing with the goal setting, and if we're going to do that as jointly set goals, if we can't come to an agreement as a board with our employee about what their goals are for the next year, that's another sign. So I don't think we should be able to just independently throw people on the 360. I don't think we should be able to independently put a goal on there as a single board member, or even as a group as the board. We should be doing that jointly with our employee.
I agree with all of what everybody has said. So I hope those comments are helpful.
Even though what I said conflicted with some of the other people
I
said.
agree with that. I agree with that we have inherent conflicts.
I'd just like to add on to what Commissioner Bozovich said. I think that's unlikely too. But there ought to be a process in that event, right? That's all. In place.
Okay, so do you have any other feedback you want to get from us?
Well, what we were hoping is that, I think we're hearing some themes of where you're interested in having some changes and some options, and we had thought we would be able to go away and perhaps put together
Do it.
an order for consent calendar, but
Oh.
there are a few things that are a little gray as far as where I'm hearing interest, and I don't know.
Use your best judgment.
Well, could we have another iteration before it's on
Well,
consent calendar?
perhaps it doesn't go on consent, perhaps we just set it up to come back and walk
Yeah.
through, this is what we heard, this is the recommendation now,
Yeah.
instead of just presenting options.
Yeah, that's
And then
fine.
come ready.
Come
at
with a
that
board
point.
order, and we won't
With
put
it.
it on consent, I agree, and that way everybody will get a shot. And remember, Commissioner Farr had to leave, so maybe it's best that we just put it up as a proposed board order for discussion and possible action, and then that way you can kind of take these four comments, 4 to the 4th power opinions, and that's lower than 5 to the 5th power. So take those ideas, make up a board order that you think encapsulates it, and if there are gray areas, then you fill that in the best you can if commissioners have a problem with it. I just, the reason I said I agree with what everybody has said is because I think that you guys have done a great job, and any problems that I have are really on the periphery and minor, and aren't maybe that good of an idea anyway.
Did Commissioner Ford, when he left, said just fire everybody? Was that what he said?
Sounds just like him.
I heard him say he's heading for Jerry's.
This could very well be true.
So, okay, are we done with that?
Yes,
I think
Chair and
so.
Commissioners, thank you for the conversation. We'll go forward
Thank you.
and
Okay.
plan something for the new year.
Thank you so much, and now we'd like to go to item 15A, and that is Mr. Sandow, if you could come up to the table. This is, I'll read this in while Dennis is moving towards the table here. This is item 15A. It's our discussion and a presentation from Dennis Sandow. Dennis is president of Reflexus Company. We've set this up, Dennis, for, we set this up, Dennis, for a 15-minute presentation from you, and we're really looking forward to this. We've also set up an additional 15 minutes for the commissioners to have discussion or to ask you questions. So welcome, Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. This is an issue that's very important to me, and it's taken me 40 years to realize that closing an inquiry is really important when you talk about workplace health. So thank you. I have a feeling this might be more for my benefit than yours, but it gives me an opportunity to close things up. The literature is pretty complete when it comes to social determinants of work. And what that means is there are psychosocial properties related to working by ourselves and together. Social relations have psychological impact. And the most famous work was done in Whitehall Street with the British government. And they found that job control, having freedom to make decisions in an organization, constitutes for improved health. When one has little job control, the likelihood of having a heart disease more than doubles. Having social support is also beneficiary not only to the individuals but to the organization, because we know that health is productivity, and healthy relationships create social capital or social productivity. Having little social support generates ill mental health and almost doubles the likelihood that a person will have ill mental health. And then recognizing performance, folks that are recognized and rewarded for their performance and contributions are less likely to have heart disease than those who are not. Okay, so that's the landscape of the social determinant research. It gets a lot deeper than this. The source that I would point you to would be Dr. Peter Schnall at UC Irvine. He's done extraordinary work as a cardiologist in this area. So if those are the mitigating factors that directly affect employee health, let's see if I could work this. Then what do we do about it? I'm not the sharpest guy around. It took me 40 years to figure this out because it had to be very, very simple. And it took me that long to develop a methodology that is simple and simply effective. This process happens within a 5-day period. And it starts by the leadership of the organization identifying a valued accomplishment. So what contribution did all of the employees or administrator make that everyone feels real excited about, proud of? Now, the difference here is most approaches are problematic. They're oriented towards solving a problem. This goes the other way. This says, maybe we should spend some time understanding how things work so well around here. And once that accomplishment's identified, then in this 5-day period, data is collected by listening to people talk about how they accomplished that value creation. This is qualitative research. It comes from a discipline of trying to understand relationships instead of just components or parts. So you could think of qualitative research as the opposite of analysis. It wants to look at what's the explanation for how people did this together. And so one after another, generally about 25 minutes each, employees will come in who made the contribution, or maybe others, subcontractor, administrator, manager, and they'll explain this to me. I'll collect data as notes on that conversation, return it to everyone, and ask them to make sure that my notes are valid. That's because the criteria for quality in this work is validation. It's to understand the people. And understanding only happens when they comment on the quality of listening and say, boy, this person understands me. Once all the interviews are completed, the interview data is validated with each person, we look across all the notes and identify common themes. So what is it that people held in common around this experience of generating value for the organization? Some that come to my mind are freedom from micromanagement, support from other coworkers. Some things that are most meaningful will seem trivial to us. A group of scientists once told me there's always cake, because there was always cake in the lab. And cake is where they went when they're stuck on a problem. And being there eating cake gave them the opportunity to brainstorm and solve significant problems. These common themes are explanations of how people work well together. And we succumb oftentimes to rules of statistics and statistical significance. For example, I have high blood pressure, and I can look at the proportion of American males in my age range that have high blood pressure. That's a statistical study of high blood pressure. I run a chart on my high blood pressure almost every day that looks at the effects of diet, my weight, and my exercise. And I can watch my blood pressure normalize. And that's the sort of data we're talking about here. Positive behavioral change doesn't happen statistically. It's proven statistically, but it happens on a person-by-person basis. So the themes then, if this practice is sustained, starts to show that everybody attributes the same relational qualities to doing their best work, regardless of what department they're connected to. It becomes a very powerful finding because now we know what are the relationships that create value for the organization. And we can start to make sure those are part of our culture, ongoing culture. The the step then is to map the social network. I started this social network analysis. It's just a matter of asking with whom did you collaborate to create this value. And why we do that is twofold. One is it's social capital, that the people in the network are spread across the organization chart and across silos. This helps us break the silos as a constraining organization structure. The other thing it does is shows us how to measure social collaboration. It gives us a new view into social networks and how networks collaborate, how they change over time, and how they conserve their social cohesion. On the last day of the 5-day period, we bring all those findings, the people who participated, the management team, anybody who wants to sit in, because this should and is a celebration of how we do our best work. And we revisit those themes and the social network data as a learning opportunity to conserve the culture that brings about our best work. Now you can notice with the social determinants, what have we done? Well, we've recognized and rewarded people for their performance. We've supported each other's understanding how our best work gets done. And we have created through the data collection a mechanism for employees to be free to comment on how they do their best work together. So this work, because it was founded in improving productivity and well-being, directly addresses the social determinants in a positive way. And that's my presentation. So I was hoping that we might have a bit more of an extended conversation so we could chat about this, because employee health is paramount to living well in our community. So I'll just open it up to you folks.
Good, okay, thanks very much. I'm just curious, on this, Whitehall study. It's basically, as I understand it, it's, a study, a scientific study of 20,000 or so people who worked for the British government in the 60s, and it's comparing the health problems of people who have management jobs as opposed to the people who have, let's say, jobs like messenger, doorkeeper, other kinds of jobs. And 2/3 of the people were men, 1/3 were women, about 20,000 people. And the conclusion was the people at the top had fewer medical problems, and the people at the bottom had more problems measured in terms of smoking or obesity or whatever. What is all that? How does that influence your recommendations for what we're doing?
Well, what Whitehall's study does of the study of civilian employees is it showed first the psychological effects of social organization. And second, it was a snapshot of the effects that having less control, less support, and less rewards and recognition have in that environment. I have found since then that that original study has been amended, that really none of us are quite free of this. The executive is subordinate to, in this case, the board of directors or shareholders. And so they too can find themselves in this dilemma. For example, a shareholder that says, I want a new mouse within 2 weeks, to an executive who knows that they cannot build that. That executive will experience the same relational dynamics.
So it isn't necessarily, if you want to use the terms, people at the top versus people at the bottom, if you use those terms, you're saying that the Whitehall study, which was what it was, a study of the health effects, you're saying that the mental health effects are still present throughout the workforce, regardless of status of workers.
Yeah, the physiological effects of having little support, little freedom, or little recognition are the same regardless of position in the system.
What does this have to do with Lane County workforce, in your opinion?
It's an opportunity to generate health in the Lane County workforce. It's a new perspective. Because it's not problem-oriented, this builds in another performance mechanism for understanding performance that is validated by the workforce and celebrated by the board. So if Lane County as an organization is using management controls that come from kind of our industrial era and trying to move into a knowledge age, then its performance can be exponentially improved by studying how work is done in groups and networks. So this, and I've talked with Steve, who's a person, in my view, that understands a lot of this intuitively, but it gives a learning platform for all of management to learn through work what social capital and human capital mean. Those two things are theories, they're not scientific, but they can be scientifically studied through empirical data collection. So the short answer is you'll do a whole lot more with a whole lot less.
Okay, other commissioners?
So I'm going to show my age here a little bit. Reminds me of some of the discussions of TQM, Total Quality Management, way back when, we were being out-competed by the Japanese. And they got the idea that, any worker in the assembly line, we ought to be able to suggest a change to the car. Kind of put that in place, and America was playing catch-up somewhat, but at the same time, it also got nicknamed around a lot of offices Total Buzzword Management.
Yep.
Too. So, but the idea about job control, social support, reward for work is not new, as far as improving productivity and also improving employee engagement, which improves health. Part of the problem is we seem to be passing laws and judicial decisions that are making it harder and harder to do these things. Whether it's a judge's decision where even an employer with a very strong employee manual around taking your 30 minutes for your lunch has now gotten to the point where the employer is being punished for not having forced his employees to take their 30 minutes. It is, where's the employee control of their work in that? Everything from our Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act, which doesn't allow for some of that job control, to where we get into pay equity laws, where if we do give rewards that are either financial or some kind of benefit, that would be considered part of your total compensation, it may make us violate pay equity. So, to me, we're actually, in the regulatory sense of labor law, getting away from allowing public employers to actually do what you'd like to do. And we have to kind of recognize that, we are operating under those union contracts. We are operating under, labor decisions in courts. We are operating under brand new laws that we're barely understanding at this point when it comes to pay equity, and how that's going to impact our ability to differentially recognize somebody that has done something that we've identified as a valued accomplishment. And we reward that employee or group of employees, and they're not a balanced group of gender-wise or something like that, we may be in big trouble. So I appreciate, it's interesting, it's as these things cycle through the various versions of employer and HR systems and all that stuff. It reminds me of some of my earliest management experiences where TQM was the new and upcoming thing. And it was about empowering employees.
Yep. So TQM was a governmental model of Dr. Deming's continuous quality improvement philosophy. And if you remember, you're spot on. Dr. Deming said, adopt the new philosophy. That was his first point to top management. What does that mean? What he was saying was, and forgive me if there's a lawyer in the room here.
Only one.
That logic theory was invented and is used by law in judicial and legislative proceedings as a basis for generating theory, hypothesis, and progress. But you have to read this carefully. It was invented by Bertrand Russell, who said there will be no measurement of data. We'll be like science, but we won't be scientific. And so this renders what you've explained absolutely understandable. That litigation is not based on science. It's based on a deductive theory with a set of hypotheses that by its definition do not lend themselves to empiricism. And so I put that back on you, right? You guys got to figure that out. I'll pay you taxes to figure that out. And it makes my $4,000 worth it if you can figure it out. Because in this society, if we don't use science to collect data to generate actions that improve our productivity and discovery, then where are we? I can't drink a logical theory. I can't prevent someone from beating their spouse through a logical theory. I need to have scientific data that says what is the best way to go about this. And this is something that has to be weighed in the balance. Theory is not science. Science requires empiricism. This is a methodology. Maybe it would be challenged. I think you may be right. But it will generate joy and well-being at work. It will change the culture. And people will conserve it out of their desires to live well together. And so this is just, it goes even back further than the legal profession. This is about our humanity. We're biologically wired to enjoy living together well. And the more that we violate that process of living well together, the sicker we get. So maybe that's the case law.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Well, I do.
Yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry, were you gonna? I mean, I've shared several times with everyone here that I worked with you in the early 90s, and I think, you know, I think this is the first time perhaps some of the profound insights and the heart with which you approach your work could be understood by this group, because it was always in the context, right, of a contract for doing this, or you know, how do we do this kind of institutional change, or whatever it was. So I would just like to share with the group that that back in early 90s, when I created with a community board a mentoring program, it was Dennis's insights into relationships, and mapping social relationships. I don't know if you remember this, but where we had a mentor program, and it allowed us to grow that mentor program to well over 1,000 volunteers. In fact, it was one of the things that brought CASA of Lane County into being. And it was really, we trained all the volunteers on mapping their personal relationships, not on the basis of what they thought a young person needed, but on the basis of the interests of that young person. I'm doing this to remind you. And so, you know, and the reason for it was over 80% of all the first jobs or work experiences young people get in this country, no matter how good or their education was or how good or bad their training was through knowing an adult that cared enough to open a door and create an opportunity or broker it, whether it was a parent, coach, teacher, pastor, whomever. So, having said all that, Dennis, I mean, I'm a fan, and yet I think the issue here is, you know, what's the right kind of environment, which I think you're looking for, to provide data to demonstrate how this can really increase the productivity of an organization. And just, you know, to be a part of what we experienced today was also talking about the health centers, and in terms of how they're evaluated across the country. Ours is right there with almost no turnover, very low turnover. People seem to be very pleased, etc. So I don't know if you can speak to those two worlds, or if I just wanted to make a comment in front of you. But
No. Joy, I think you teed it up, right? If you're seen as being an exemplar across the country in the operation of community health clinics, it warrants curiosity to say why. Now, this is a really interesting question, because it's not what should we do, it's how do we do what we do. how do we do what we do to get such an excellent rating? And in the process of answering that question and listening to employees, you'll generate social health. People feel like they've made a contribution. They'll generate understanding of why the organization is seen in this way.
But any group could do that.
Any
correct?
group,
Yeah.
any group. And what's most important is we realize that our rewards aren't from outside accreditations. Our rewards are from living well together. You know, to leave work and go home and at dinner say, it was a great day. Remember Debbie, who is on chemo? Wow, the whole team took care of her. Everybody shaved their head, they came in, had a party, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things that are the real rewards for top managers. And so this is really, I appreciate your comments because this is very concrete work. It's very, very simple. And it's very, very effective.
Okay, Commissioner Buck?
I really like, being able to flip the conversation to what we're doing well versus how can we improve, because we're always talking about how we can improve. But it's a very different conversation when you talk about how do we do this so well. And I would think that in doing this work, there's themes that are probably very similar as to why this occurs within certain organizations. I can acknowledge that for maybe a specific department or a specific agency, that those answers might have some nuances. But overarching, I would be very curious as to what are the overarching themes as you've done this in other organizations or similar organizations. I don't know if you have that data.
I do, and I'd be happy to send it to you.
That would be really interesting for me to read. I appreciate that.
There, I'll give away the ending to the film. They have an odd symmetry to our founding principles in the country. It's very fascinating what you hear. And you'll see this when I send them to you, but having freedom to organize, having caring for one another, being seen as a person who wants to contribute and is contributing, all show up regardless of where you're at and regardless of the company that you're in. And this is what would give the entire organization confidence, because when you bring this data back and people realize that it's been collected fairly and without bias, that it really represents their point of view, confidence grows, and that's why productivity grows. Carly Fiorina just needed one social network map of value being created across her company, and then went to all of her top management and said, you have to collaborate. Because this illusion that you're in a silo is not how we create our best work. Right, so those kind of actions are available to a top executive with the data that's been collected. And then all other managers can see that they should also allow that collaboration to happen and automatically start to generate more freedom in the culture. But I'll put these together with some comments so you can get a feel for how we code out these themes and send it along to you.
Me too, please.
Good.
Be happy to.
Yeah, please send it out to all the commissioners. Okay. Well, I think that concludes our discussion, unless any commissioners or Dennis, if you want to add anything further.
I do. We never know what our perceptions are, and this may or may not be necessary, but if there's a perception that I work for an outside agency, I want to suspend that. I don't work for unions. This was an instance where I was invited in to an area that I have expertise in, and my first encounter with the union. Honestly, I don't understand the dynamics between unions and organizations. I've never played in that domain. I've always been with workers. So the first thing I want to say is this work that I presented isn't tied to a union. The other thing I wanted to say is I don't intend to pursue this any further. I now have closure where I can write those involved and just say we've gone full circle. We have a methodology that's been proven to generate well-being in the workplace. And now we know how we can go about that. And lastly, I've decided that I'm not interested in any contract. I think I'm far more effective in relating to you as a taxpayer. But I do have expertise, and my world is best when I could share that as a volunteer. And so if Steve were to call and say, Dennis, we have just this great thing that happened, let's run through this to see how it works. I'm not going to talk to him about a contract. I don't want to. Maybe that's illegal too. But just to set it straight.
We do take both tax dollars and volunteer work here. Yeah.
I take everything. I take food.
That we probably can't do.
The reason I say this is I was raised and through my adult life have always volunteered to improve my community. And that holds true here and was behind my decision that I don't want any contract relationship. But I do hope there's an opportunity to pursue this line of work, because you're going to find networks where there are union people, non-union people, salaried people, non-salaried people doing your best work for you. And it's a path out of these divisions that we have. And Commissioner Bozovich kind of raised the fear in me. There's folks who might say, hey, not everybody in the workplace felt well today, so we're against doing that too. That could be, I don't know, but I do know that our preference as human beings is to live well together in our daily living. Just to close, I'll say something really, really kind of enticing, I would hope. I met with a group of HP retired leaders last week, and I told them that Hewlett-Packard has never created a high-performance work team. Never created it. And that's because Bill and Dave understood human nature. And so every day we live well together with our families, with our children, with our neighbors, and we know how to live well together because we conserve that. We conserve the health. And at Hewlett-Packard, they simply allowed that manner of living together to occur at work. And so in 1963, David Packard started writing about this monthly. Steve, I'd like to send you a link of those writings because they're extraordinary, where he says, we prefer informal to formal. What he was saying is, we prefer that you go on living well together while you're doing your work here. He says, Bill and I don't have control over the organization anymore. We leave it to your loyalty and enthusiasm. Really beautiful stuff. And so what we're seeing here is that in living well together, we generate networks of conversations that, if we conserve in the workplace, allows the health and productivity to expand. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you for the time.
All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this discussion. I'm now going to go down.
But I got this contract here, didn't I? Just kidding.
If it's more than $2.50, I'll sign it.
Yeah.
Your comments also remind me that some of my best legal advice is, please stay away from lawyers. if you can, in your life. Okay, I'm going down the list of all the things we are concluding, and here's what I have. We want to finish our remonstrance.
That's right.
That's item number 5. We want to do our commissioner announcements, our agenda team requests, and a review of assignments. We don't have an executive session or other business. So, at this time, I will call for further remonstrance. Seeing none.
I have one.
Oh, you have one.
This is pretty cool. It was at my seat. What's this all about?
It's a bookmark. You use it to save your place in a book that you're reading.
Yeah, when you
I know what a bookmark
when
is.
you read a book,
I mean, I'm just saying, get a little punchier.
Wait a minute. Don't you? I thought you did this with it.
Devin's giving me a shit. Did you hear the thing about your evaluation? Those are.
Yeah.
Devin, why don't you share with the commissioners what the bookmarks are? Because
This is what it's for.
explain what a book is first, and then a bookmark.
Yeah, you dumb piece of.
I prefer my books with pictures. No, the bookmarks are an example of one of the tools that we're using to get the word out about the survey currently open regarding the Justice Center. So we're doing a number of things. There have been pairs of folks out in our mostly rural communities so far, talking to people directly. This gives them an opportunity to encourage those folks to take the longer survey online. We've also been advertising the survey online via social media. Yesterday, we sent commissioners tools that if you would be, kind enough to share on your pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then working with local media. So we have a brief survey online right now. We've had just over 70 respondents so far, and the average completion time is about 9 minutes, so it doesn't take very long. And really, it is designed to help us better understand our community's priorities for a justice center. We know that when we didn't receive full voter support for the proposal in May, that we needed to step back and do a little bit more listening, and that's really starting with this discussion around, and what does our community want to see? What is our community's vision of justice now and into the future, and how can we take those values forward as we reevaluate our proposal for a justice center here in Lane County?
Okay, go ahead.
Is it possible to get a copy of the survey questions without having to go in and fill out the survey?
Do you mean a printed version for people that would prefer that?
Yeah, or for us commissioners, because I don't think I should be participating in the survey necessarily, but I'd like to know what the survey actually asked people.
I will create that and get that out to commissioners tomorrow.
Thank you.
Are there any other remonstrances
No,
or
it's just-
continued remonstrances?
I know the hour. I'm not going to ask Steve anything, but I wanted to ask you, Devin. So, for example, this Friday morning, Friday the 13th, I'll be at the Eugene Chambers Government Affairs meeting.
If you would like more bookmarks.
That's what I was going to ask you. How can I be of most service to getting as many people as possible tuned into this? Is it just using these as the prop?
That would be helpful. I know that you're all out in the community speaking with, residents and groups that I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity
Right.
to connect with. So I will make sure to get those in hands of any commissioners that would like more. We're also, as we're identifying different communities for that in-person outreach, reaching out to the commissioner whose district it's in to see if that commissioner is available to join them for a period of time. And I know
Great.
scheduling can be tricky. And then your social media following will be an important addition to the folks that are following the main county pages. So all of those would be wonderful ways to help people with that.
So tomorrow, could you get me some of these?
I will do
Thank
that.
you.
Are there any other remonstrances before we move on to item 15B, which is announcements? Okay, seeing no further remonstrance, we can move to 15B, announcements. Are there any announcements by commissioners?
I'll just
Commissioner Buck.
remind folks that after my radio talk on KNND in Cottage Grove on Monday, I'll have my Cottage Grove office hours again, so come join.
Okay,
Dead
any
rat.
other announcements before we go on to items 15C and D? Seeing no further announcements, items 15C and D are our agenda team requests and work session requests. I had a couple, and maybe a third. The first one was the carbon tax advocates came in and asked that the carbon tax federal legislation be referred to the legislative committee. And I'd like to suggest we do refer it to the legislative committee. But before we do, I'd like to find out if there are enough commissioners that would support that.
Sure.
Yes, okay. I count 3 commissioners. Second one was the advocates for the, some of the advocates for putting the ballot measure on the ballot about banning aerial herbicides in Lane County for forest or agricultural uses. They asked, at least they sent an email to me, asking that we advocate for a ban. I think it's Representative Holvey had a ban on aerial herbicide application in a state legislative change, and they wanted that to go to the legislative committee, and I was wondering if the commissioners would support a referral of that idea to the legislative committee.
So when something is referred, what does that mean?
It means the legislative committee is asked by the board to look into it, and when they make their recommendations,
Then bring it back.
bring it back to the board. So it doesn't mean that we are initiating a work session, it's a direction to a,
Gotcha.
so that was my proposal, but I don't want to pursue it unless there's 3 commissioners that want to advance it.
I have no problem looking at it.
Okay.
That piece of legislation never even got a hearing.
It did not get a hearing.
I haven't
I mean,
read it, so I don't even know what we're talking about until.
It doesn't have strong support at all, I'm saying.
No, it does not have strong support.
So I don't know why we waste time with it, but that's
Well,
my point of view, but if.
No,
the other
I
two
get it.
Commissioners want to refer it to ledge committee, they can.
yeah, I get it, and that's why I'm taking the process of not recommending a work session, but rather an agenda team request.
And that's why I asked what the process is. So forgive me, I've not been on the ledge committee before. So it goes there.
You'll get your fund.
That group looks at it. That group just makes a recommendation. It goes to the board. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Okay. And then the board determines whether that's, forgive me for the remediation here, but whether that's a priority or whether we're just tracking.
It might not even come to the board.
Does that make sense?
It might not
Because I
even come to
remember
the
that
board.
matrix.
It might not even come to the
Ledge committee
board.
could decide that just not to bring it to the.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It may not come back to the board. So are there 3 commissioners that want to have it considered?
I don't have a problem with legislative committee discussing it.
Okay. And then I didn't know if this was a request or how it was left, but
Do you agree?
the climate,
I would, I didn't, but
Okay.
just to look
Sorry,
at
I
it.
just want to make.
No, you're right, I did.
no, I agree. I want to,
I'm just doing that check-in because I can just hear Diana going, I didn't see 3 head nods.
yeah,
Right.
no.
No, thank
And just to be clear, here's what I heard. I heard Commissioner Bozovich didn't want to do it. I heard
Said it's a
3
waste
other
of time,
commissioners
which is
say they did want to refer it to the legislative committee.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, this
Yep.
was on the, I heard the carbon tax
Yeah.
discussion referral. Then
Yeah,
there was
that's a federal issue.
Right. And then the second one was what that you just.
It's a bill that, as I understand, would ban ban individuals and companies from spraying herbicides from helicopters or airplanes. And maybe it's just forest herbicides, I don't know. I'll get more detail
So
on
you
it,
don't
but,
know either. I don't know either.
yeah. But it definitely applies to forest herbicides in Oregon. And there was a bill in the 2019 and 2017 and 2019 bills dealing with this topic, and the county did not take a position on those bills. And one of them was introduced by Representative Holvey, and as pointed out by Commissioner Bozovich, it did not get a hearing, and the county did not take a position for or against it. And I'm recommending that we get on top of that now.
Yep.
And that my count is that 3 commissioners said they wanted it referred, and 1 commissioner didn't want it referred, so therefore it will be referred. So with regard to the climate action, I'm not quite sure where that was left, and so I'm not proposing anything, I just want to make sure that if there is anything that we want to come back, that we make it more formal at this portion of the meeting. So nothing needs to come back, or I guess you're the one that talked mostly about the resolution, so I'll call on you first.
Well, it's my understanding, as Commissioner Bernie mentioned, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're
but-
wrong.
That was fast.
Just being silly. I
We've
apologize.
reached the punchy point at the
If
board
Steve can tell
meeting.
me what a bookmark is for.
Sometime in March was the time frame.
That was my
to come back.
suggestion.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think they got that. I think Mr. Hurley understood that.
So maybe that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, were you doing,
Yeah.
you wanted me to do assignments?
Well, we're almost, I think, first of all, I think
I
what
wasn't gonna do
Commissioner
that
Buck,
as an assignment, just because it wasn't really requested for head nods, it was
Correct.
just direction
May I
given
hear?
under the item.
yeah, Commissioner
I
Bernie
think
would
Pete's
like to-
looking for clarification.
Yeah, right.
And I think the clarification you provided us at the meeting, which we did head nod, which
Yep.
was a middle path of begin the process.
Yep.
Not rush too hastily, but to demonstrate a desire for action by March.
Right.
Come with some sort of a draft resolution that might be somewhat broad or nebulous, but it will be aligned with the input thus far and can set the stage for more specificity.
Here.
That's how I took it.
Isn't that-
Okay,
And the
that's
reason you
good.
didn't have that today is because we weren't clear on that's what the direction
No.
was written. So it's just a good reminder that when you have these discussions to make an assignment,
Yep.
Yes.
the more direction or specificity you can give.
Yeah.
Referring something to ledge committee is pretty easy, but on those kind of things,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
helpful.
Heather, is that consistent?
Okay, so I'm done with mine. Are there any other commissioners that like to be recognized for purposes of items 15C or D? Okay, seeing none, I'll now turn to the administrator for our review of assignments, item 16.
So I just have the two legislative items to be referred to the legislative committee. The first one is the carbon tax discussion, the federal discussion of carbon tax referred to the legislative committee. And the second one is the state bill from the 17 and 19 session that talked about banning aerial herbicide spraying in the state legislature. So both those will go to the legislative committee. And then we will draft and bring forward a resolution on climate action as was discussed today as part of that item, but I'm not calling that a separate assignment.
Right. Okay, anything further under review of assignments? Yes.
Another question, that is it not kind of early? What's the time frame to refer things to the ledge committee so that the legislature doesn't take off without us having the choice to weigh in or not weigh in or prioritize?
At any time.
At any time?
Sure.
Do we have months?
The
Not before the
legislature can
short
meet
session.
whenever the
Okay.
legislature wants to, or the
Okay.
governor calls
You
them.
answered.
and is-
I'll have something for later then.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry,
right.
okay. Thank you,
All
sir.
right, I'd like to thank Commissioner Buck and Mr. Mulkreisky for their careful assistance in planning this meeting, so we are coming out way before 9:00 PM as I had anticipated. So, are we done? Are we done? So we are in recess then until our 9 AM meeting with our friends from the Fair Board and our other half-day session that we have worked out. Please mark your calendars for a full day on the 17th.
No kidding.
All right, as opposed to the light day we had today. Okay, so we're in recess. Thank you.
Are you going?